Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and apologies for a slightly delayed start. The importance of economic growth for any state's prosperity is well captured by the philosopher poet Thiruvalluvar, who said, "Thalla vilayalum, takkarum, thalvila chelvarum, servadu nadu," which translates to, "In produce unfailing, unceasing in creation of wealth, that land of good and capable people is a nation in good health." The trillion-dollar economy vision represents an effort by the government of Tamil Nadu to realize Thiruvalluvar's vision of a prosperous state. We extend a hearty welcome to the distinguished members of the Economic Advisory Council, senior officers, industry leaders, entrepreneurs, media representatives, and the other esteemed guests to this thought leadership session on the big bets for Tamil Nadu's $1 trillion economy. Please join me in welcoming Thiru Udayachandran, IAS, Principal Secretary Finance, Government of Tamil Nadu, to deliver the keynote address. May I invite Prashant sir to.
Very good afternoon to everyone. Dr. Raghuram Rajan, Dr. Arvind Subramanian, both esteemed members of the Economic Advisory Council of Honorable CM, and leaders from diverse sectors of industry, media representatives, officials, experts, friends, and colleagues. Welcome to this first session of the Tamil Nadu Global Investor Meet 2024. It gives me immense pleasure and privilege to host this highly awaited event where two great minds of our time would interact and express their views on the potential of Tamil Nadu's economy. The Honorable Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu gave this grand vision to our state to become $1 trillion economy by 2030. Under his able guidance, preparation of a strategic plan was set in motion. The Tamil Nadu Infrastructure Development Board under the Finance Department has engaged the Boston Consultancy Group for preparation of the roadmap to be followed by the state. A summary document of the plan has been just released in the inaugural session by Honorable CM, and I hope that the learned members of this august gathering would explore it further. Being the pioneer in shaping various landmark social welfare schemes in the country, Tamil Nadu has also set an example to the country in facilitating robust model of economic growth. The state is investing heavily in infrastructure sector, be it highways or ports, airports, green and renewable energy, or industrial water use, with a specific focus to ensure the growth of the economy is on right track. The government is committed to making Tamil Nadu as the ideal destination for businesses to arrive and creating more and more opportunities for the new industrial jobs. The massive improvement in Tamil Nadu's position in ease of doing business in the recent past is a testimony to this commitment. An economic powerhouse, Tamil Nadu has a solid industrial base with the robust MSME sector, a diverse industrial canvas with more than 130 Fortune 500 companies operating out of the state. A strong presence of IT majors and a stable growth in primary sector is to be noted. Tamil Nadu also prides itself in having one of the most skilled workforce in the country, with substantial participation of women. Building on its strength, we are confident that Tamil Nadu is well positioned to achieve the $1 trillion economy and its vision. Preparation of this strategic report is only the first step towards the goal. We realize that the government will form suitably the sector-specific action groups to consider this report, assess the feasibility, and the impact potential of the recommendation and chart a detailed course of action. With the guidance of the Economic Advisory Council and with the stalwarts like our esteemed guest, guided by their expert policy advice, we will take appropriate action to take it forward. Sector-specific policy actions will be identified to push growth in each sector of the economy. Every major verticals, including automobile, electric vehicles, electronics, metals, chemicals, machinery, textiles, footwear, in specifically to technical textiles and non-leather footwear specifically. Among the manufacturing, the service sector will be a major growth driver in the near future, while IT and GCC will figure prominently in the strategy. Growth potential in areas such as tourism, animation and visual effects, financial services and trade, among others, will also be explored in a major way. The dream growth story would be written together by the government and the private sector. The government would play a more proactive role in strengthening key enablers such as robust infrastructure investments, catering to the needs of the growing economy, with a special focus on logistics, power, water, etc. A major push to upskill the workforce needed for the economy of coming age. Facilitation of credit availability will be the major focus, especially to the MSME sector, creation of a vibrant ecosystem for R&D, promotion of innovation through startups from the state. With deft handling of state finances, balancing revenue resources with expenditure requirements, the government is committed to creating enough fiscal space to facilitate this ambitious endeavor. Already, the results of the efforts of the government in the past 2.5 years are visible as the economy has recovered from the shock of the pandemic and started to trajectory of growth. We are moving ahead. I'm confident that with the support and participation of all the key stakeholders, both private and public, we can certainly reach the milestone of $1 trillion economy by 2030. Yes, it's the vision of the Honorable Chief Minister, the commitment of our government, and aspirations of 72 million people of Tamil Nadu. Welcome to the journey. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your guidance on Tamil Nadu's vision as well as its pathway towards realizing this. Next, we have Mr. Rahul Jain, Managing Director and Senior Partner, India Head of BCG, who will share with us his insights on the growth opportunity for Tamil Nadu and the key enablers as Tamil Nadu walks its path towards this vision.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think a lot has been already said, so I'll try to maybe elaborate on a few specific aspects and both paints a slightly bigger picture, but then also zero in on some micro details which will be critical for us as we move forward. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. So I think let's start before we zoom into Tamil Nadu at a country level first. I think as you can see, and as has been talked by many people, this is going to be our decade. It is very very well talked about in terms of what our country is witnessing right now. And if you look at it from both consumption and investment point of view, this is a unparalleled time for us. If you see any consumption metric in terms of both how the different industries are shaping, how the demographic dividend is playing out, you see industry after industry, India being a market leader in terms of growth that the consumption sector is providing. Whether it is just to illustrate, I mean, you take auto industry, the two-wheeler market, growing at 7%, the #1 growing market in the world. Look at the aviation industry, we are again growing at 11%, is the number 3 in the world. And a lot of that is driven by our massive demographic dividend, which is again very well known. But just to contrast, on an average, our working population and our age is 10 years lesser than China. Many parts of the world, we are 20 years lesser. And it's a huge privilege and advantage for us in times to come. Also, what it does is the growing and the working population is very sizably based in India. And therefore, as we think of scripting our manufacturing future, that will play a very critical role. I think the other very important aspect is the infrastructure that has been built, not just physical, which we all talk about, but also digital, whether it is UPI, whether it is ONDC, and all the plethora of different things that have been rolled out, which is worldwide seen as an example of what we stand for. Right? So that's the macro picture of India. Next slide. If we look at what it therefore, as we zoom into different states, I think Chennai and Tamil Nadu has been a shining beacon in this. I think as we have learned in the inauguration session, we have really leapfrogged over the last few years, both from an investment appetite and in the way the world perceives it. Right? I think if you look at our own economy, right, it's the second largest economy in the country, as you know, in terms of GDP. But if Tamil Nadu was a country, it will be the 50th largest GDP in the world, and that will be comparable to Finland and almost 60% of Singapore. That is Tamil Nadu itself. It is actually the most industrialized state in India, with more than 45,000 registered factories and 15% of all operational factories within the country in Tamil Nadu. And also a very intriguing factor, it is actually a very regionally inclusive state. If you look at many of our peer states, a lot of the economic activity is focused on very few districts. But in Tamil Nadu, we have 25% plus districts which contribute to half of our GDP. It is a far more spread out economic development than any other state which is comparable to us. If you look at even the growth of, next slide please. Even if you look at the growth of the state, it will stand out in compared to others. We are, I think, 5th largest, fastest growing state, and just the delta GDP that we add every year in this state is by itself the size of several countries in the world. So I think it cannot be ignored in its size and its growth. Our per capita consumption is also among the top 3 in the country. So it's a very strong starting point. But as has been laid out, we want to take it to the next level. We want to reach the $1 trillion economy, and therefore, I think 2 factors which we wanted to highlight very differently, which are underlying strengths of the state. One is a very strong skilled workforce. If you look at the percentage workforce that is skilled, it is step change higher than any other state in the country. It is, if you look at the GER, which is a higher rate percentage, in Tamil Nadu it is 47% compared to 27% in the rest of the state. If you look at the labor force ratio, it is 65% compared to 58%. As I was saying, even within this, if you look at the share of the skilled labor, and if you look at the share of the supervisory labor, it is substantially higher than the rest of the country. Right? Also, it is socially inclusive, and this goes back to our rich tradition, Dravidian revolution. I think the percentage women both in the higher ed and the labor force is again substantially higher than the rest of the country, right? And these are very strong underlying factors which help us in times to come. Next slide, please. I think as we chart out the course, right, for us as a state, there were 5 factors which we felt were very critical. Right? One is the entire impetus on services. If you look at the share of services in the state, it's been traditionally a bit lower than the rest of the peer states. And that could be a huge opportunity for us in really charting that out. In the way the roadmap has been laid out, services play a massive role in taking the state forward in our vision towards the $1 trillion economy. And for that, our workforce, our consumption, our population, all will be a pretty critical role. And that, if you zoom in further, comes down to creating lots of global capability centers, innovation hubs, attracting tourism, and really focusing on IT in tier 1, tier 2 cities. If all of these were to leapfrog, services will naturally follow, and that could be a very big driver of growth for the state. The second big piece which has been envisioned is really actually value adding and moving in each industry from basic to advanced. Now, whether it is moving to technical textiles, whether it is moving to, within agriculture to most post-harvest processing, whether it is moving from mobile phone manufacturing assembly to actually going down to sub-components and actual ingredients of that, whether it is going to cell manufacturing. So we have to move from one level to the second level within the value chain, which creates higher employment and economic growth. The third big piece is around exports. If you look at it, we are already quite well positioned on that, but there are several categories like electronics, auto components, textiles, ER&D, footwear, leather, where we have a natural advantage and we could play a pretty significant role. And here, I think the global macroeconomic view where the world is trying to diversify from China, looking for a clear second option in India plays a big role, and Tamil Nadu is really well positioned to play a big role in this. I think the fourth thing we wanted to talk about is actually taking scale and creating real advantage in a few sectors. Now, we are very well known for auto and EV. We are known for textile, capital goods, electronics. How could we really focus on them to create a big scale advantage and establish global competitiveness? Because in the long run, that will be the most critical. And last but not the least, there are a slew of global mega trends, whether it is green energy, specialty chemical, and we have located these, and these are part of the roadmap on how do we capture them specifically as a part of our journey. So these were some of the building blocks which led to thinking about the future, economic growth acceleration. Next slide, please. If we look at the 4 key enablers for this, next slide, please. We have identified 4 enablers which are very critical. Resilient infrastructure, R&D and innovation, human capital development, and strategic investments. I will just take 30 seconds on each. Next slide, please. The infrastructure, a lot has been talked, so I think we can skip. A lot has already been done, but we have envisioned a roadmap for different elements, whether it is road corridor, whether it is city master plans, whether it is air cargo handling and sea cargo handling facility. Each of these are very critical to take the state's physical, already strong infrastructure to the next level to provide the next impetus of growth. Next slide, please. I think similarly, equally important is R&D and innovation. Whether it is attracting unicorns and the startup ecosystem, or it is creating private-led R&D and facilitating global companies and Indian companies to establish the R&D centers in India, or it is actually creating, we already have very strong academia. How do we connect the academia better with the industry to create greater collaboration, and how insights which remain in educational labs convert to business reality is again an important point. So between these 3, R&D and innovation could be another big enabler for us to achieve our vision. Next slide, please. I think the third piece is human capital. I think we will need to make a step change on this. As we know, we rely a lot on actually imported labor as well from other states. I think as we think of both skilled value addition and the amount of work that happens, we will need to really upskill lots of current workforce from whatever skill level they are to the next level. Similarly, we'll need to include and integrate 60 lakh additional women into the workforce. And likewise, we will need to really ensure health and well-being of our workforce. So that's on the human capital side. Next slide, please. And last and not the least, I think equally important is strategic investments, which is sector-specific policies which are well worked through and facilitate investment. A very strong ecosystem orchestration, especially as you create hubs and you attract investment in creating common facilities, skilling, etc. And largely, a very strong institutional structure for government to business services, single window, and a lot has been done there. But really, how do you facilitate investment and collaboration, which is seamless and people find it more easy to work? As we talk to global companies, they still feel, while we have moved a lot as a country and as a state, there are still few yards to move on them to become really world standard. So between these four enablers, we believe we have all the raw elements there, and as we work with them, we will achieve our vision of $1 trillion economy. Thank you.
Could you stay on for a moment? Could you stay on for a moment, please? Thank you, Mr. Jain, for this presentation. May I invite Dr. S.K. Prabhakar, IAS, MD of Tamil Nadu Road Development Company, to present the memento to Mr. Jain. We now move on to the fireside discussion that we have all been eagerly waiting for on the big bets for Tamil Nadu's $1 trillion economy. The discussion will be moderated by Ms. Menika Doshi, Senior Editor, Bloomberg. The distinguished guests for this session require little by way of introduction. I welcome on stage Dr. Raghuram Rajan, former Governor of RBI, Professor of Finance at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, Dr. Arvind Subramanian, former Chief Economic Advisor, Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute. Both of them are members of the Chief Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Given the relevance of deep economic thinking to this $1 trillion vision, this promises to be a very engaging and insightful conversation. I request Prashant sir and Prabhakar to share the mementos with James.
Good morning. Can you hear us? Yes, you can. Thank you very much for being here this morning. And, what a show Tamil Nadu has put on this morning. Thank you to both our guests in this panel discussion. All morning, I think a variety of people have tried to sell Tamil Nadu to you. I'm a journalist, so I'm going to try and probe that narrative a little bit through the course of the next 45 minutes and try and understand what Tamil Nadu needs to do to deliver that $1 trillion hairy, audacious goal, as the union minister called it. Now, I'm taking the liberty to interpret big bets as things that Tamil Nadu should do, things that the state needs to improve on or fix, and things that it probably should not do. And I'm going to try and give you an overview of all of that through the minds, like, as introduced, of two thought leaders on the panel here. So let's start with you, Dr. Arjun, first. $1 trillion, doable? I don't think your audio is working. Wait, hold on.
Hello? Yeah.
Not yet?
Can you hear me?
Mine is very loud, yes.
I think the gods are conspiring against Raghu here, so it should be. Okay, let me start with, is it doable?
Doable, doable.
Okay.
That's the question to both of you.
Doable. So if you take this literally, the 1 trillion, as Piyush Goyal said, that means basically 18% growth over the next 7-8 years. Now, in the history of humanity, no country at no point in time has done 18% growth ever. Okay, for example, China did 10-11% growth over 40 years, but never 18% over 7-8 year horizon. So it is ambitious, but let me answer it by saying, if there is any state in India that could do it, it's probably Tamil Nadu.
Good save.
And second, very important, if there's any point in history where I think this could be done, I would say it's now. So if you permit me, I'll elaborate on both of these. So, okay.
If Dr. Rajan's mic is working, let me get the first
Yeah,
word
yeah,
from
okay.
him, and then I'll come back to both of you to elaborate on
sure.
why you think it's, No, I think it's still not working. It's weird. Can I give Dr. Rajan my headset, please?
Yeah, that's what.
Okay, we have a mic that's working. Great. Look, I agree entirely with what Arvind just said, that this is a very, very ambitious goal, but this is a good time for Tamil Nadu to set an ambitious goal and to try and reach it. And of course, what's important is not so much the goal as the kinds of forces that it propels within the state. When you set such a goal, then it focuses everybody's mind into doing the things that are needed to achieve that. And as a result, you get the kind of action that certainly Tamil Nadu can benefit tremendously from today, but more generally, India can benefit from. So I think that that sort of adds to what Arvind just said.
Okay, I'll pass it back to you then. You wanted to elaborate on what you think the push factors.
When I mean by why Tamil Nadu and why this point in time,
Right.
Let's start with this point in time. And just to make it a little bit personal and a little bit, is that Raghu and I actually wrote a paper on India, I don't know, about 15 years ago, basically saying what an unusual model of development India was, because unlike any other country in history, all countries that had done well had done by doing a lot of manufacturing. You go from agriculture to manufacturing and services, and India was very unusual because it kind of skipped the manufacturing stage or didn't do enough compared to all these other countries and went straight to services. Now, the interesting thing is that Raghu has now doubled down on that point and says, the future of India is services. I have actually, I'm going to tell you, I'm beginning to rethink the research that Raghu and I did at this point in time. See, because what is happening, with the decline of China is that a huge opportunity is opening up. Huge. I mean, just to give you a sense of scale, if you take labor-intensive goods in the economy, which is clothing, footwear, leather, textiles, toys, etc., China's share of global exports is something like 40%. Guess what India's share is? 4%. Okay? If, therefore, China goes from 40, as it inevitably is going to 35, 30, 25, and if India can take advantage of that opportunity, you are actually talking about reversing some of the manufacturing that India has not taken advantage of. So that's a big opportunity. So that's the China opportunity. Why Tamil Nadu? You see, I have been actually very impressed in the last 6 months by some of the things that have been happening in Tamil Nadu. Of course, a lot of investments are coming in, but actually for me, the most unique thing that's happening, which has made me sit up and kind of revise my priors, is that we always said India could never be a big exporting powerhouse because it could not operate factories at scale. 30,000, Foxconn, for example, it employs 150, 200,000 people. And India, if you looked at India, 500, the big ones would be 2,000, 2,500. But now, some of the factories that are being set up in Tamil Nadu are actually 20, 30,000 size factories, which is unprecedented. So if you, and I'm going to stop now, so if you combine that opportunity with what Tamil Nadu itself is doing in terms of beginning to operate at scale, the prospect of actually going from 4% of global exports, India will never go to 25, but 4% to 12%, 15%, that's a huge amount. Because remember, we're talking about 4% of something like 10, 15 trillion dollars, and you can really, and that's the sense in which this kind of goal that Tamil Nadu has set for itself. Probably a bit ambitious, but I think definitely something that it can aspire to.
Goals should be ambitious.
Yeah.
So good about that. Dr. Rajan, you've been arguing through your book that you co-authored with Rohit Lamba, against, I won't say against, but that a policy tilt towards manufacturing subsidies or incentives, especially low value add manufacturing, the kind of assembly work that India is currently doing is not the best solution to our problems. But Tamil Nadu runs counter to that, right? Because most of those phone factories are here. They're generating employment for women.
Right. So let me be very clear about what I'm saying.
Sure, please.
I'm saying don't over-subsidize manufacturing and think that's the only path to growth. And what we heard from the presentation so far have been, look, services is also a big part of the growth story. And let's not treat services as a stepchild, less valuable, less amenable to low-skilled jobs. Think about tourism in this state. How many jobs can be created through the tourism industry? That's what we heard in the presentation. So many opportunities to create low and semi-skilled jobs through that avenue. So that's important to remember. On Arvind's point, I'm a little more skeptical that we're going to see a whole lot of jobs, fleeing China in the non-strategic areas.
Okay.
All the textiles, this, that, etc. They'll move over time, but they're not strategic. And to that extent, the barriers to exporting from China are going to be much more limited than, for example, in some of the more strategic areas where barriers are emerging. China still has a lot of people to be employed. So it's still an attractive place. I was talking to some business people here. So we are competing, and Tamil Nadu is a very strong competitor, but we are competing with other emerging markets for that kind of low-skill business. Where we have an advantage in manufacturing is higher value-added manufacturing. And that's where all the industries of the future are coming. And so I'm very much for using the skills of the state, the tremendous number of engineers, for example, the fact that our GER ratio, the number of people in higher education at any point in time, it's north of Europe at this point in Tamil Nadu. It's 27% in the United Kingdom. We have the capability of moving higher than that low-skilled manufacturing. By all means, don't discourage it, but be more ambitious on focusing on the higher end. On, when you're making, metals, focus on specialized metals, because we have the engineering talent to do that kind of thing. So again, bottom line, don't ignore the fact that we can do a lot of low-scale manufacturing. If that comes to our shores, great, and that will come. But if you want to be ambitious, focus on the higher end. And there's a lot of higher end stuff that can be done given the quality of the education, given the growing quality of the infrastructure, given the government support with this ambitious target. And that's what I would also not ignore.
Okay. Dr. Rajan, I do want to say that I think this is a nuanced sort of shift away from the broad way your book has been interpreted. But I'll leave that aside for now. Can we get to the high value parts of this manufacturing chain without doing the low value parts, which Tamil Nadu is benefiting from right now through the assembly lines? What kind of high value bits are you talking about that would meet this requirement of big bets?
Well, so this goes back to, this is completely consistent with what I've been talking about, that higher value added, higher value added in manufacturing services are coming together. We saw earlier in the presentation today, Qualcomm is thinking of setting up design factories here. That's design operations here. That's an important aspect of chip manufacturing, the chip design that goes in. In fact, Qualcomm doesn't make any chips. It's all made in Taiwan, but Qualcomm does a design. Manufacturing and services are coming together in a really, really interesting way. Take electric vehicles, 40 million lines of code written for Tesla. That's a big part of Tesla's value, right? So manufacturing services coming together, Tamil Nadu has the benefit of being able to do both. That's great. Your question, do you have to go to the low end in order to do the high end? No evidence that you need to do that. Okay. Take Apple. Apple hasn't manufactured a product since 2004.
Sure, but how do you generate the jobs then, Dr. Rajan? Which you need at every part of the value chain.
I would say, right? You can. That's the point.
Yeah.
Generate jobs wherever you can. Assembly jobs are going to be an important factor because we have the capability, we have the workforce that can do those jobs. Those women we talked about, right. Important part of assembly in many countries, including in Tamil Nadu. So do it where you can. Second, we've got the opportunity to go higher end with the engineering talent we have, with the fact that, we talked about GCCs coming to Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu has 10% of the GCCs in India, which is 40% of the GCCs in the world. These are global capability centers. That's another example of where Tamil Nadu has an advantage. So don't necessarily just focus on the lower end and say, I need just those jobs. You can generate those jobs, but you can also generate those jobs outside of manufacturing. For example, the tourism part that we talked about. But also, the higher end is where the value added truly is. That's where we're talking about innovation. That's where we're talking about creativity. One example, in Chennai, IIT Chennai, we have a gentleman who's trying to set rockets into space. This is a firm called Agnikul. They've got a bunch of young people coming together to design the rocket. They've taken the help of ISRO. They've started some early early phase launches. But what is important really is, this is a product which is entirely
2% of the workforce, 3% of the workforce, 4% of the workforce. But as Menaka was saying, if you want to really get 15, 20, 30% of the workforce, you have no choice but to get these low-skill jobs. And the point that China will not vacate in these
the areas that it needs to improve on, and that brings me to the state of the fisc in the state, so to speak. Public debt, I think last data that I saw that was available on an aggregate basis was over 5 lakh crore rupees. I don't know if that has shifted in the last year or so, but that is, I think, almost a third of GDP, 27% of GDP in the higher end across states, right? Especially for a state as developed and industrialized as Tamil Nadu. So what do you both make of what needs to get fixed there? And the second question, I'll come to you there, is a big portion of state debt possibly is also discom debt or the debts in the power sector. Dr. Rajan first.
Well, I mean, obviously you need to look at every source of revenue to make sure that you're optimizing that. And you have to focus on trying to minimize the unnecessary expenditures. That's the obvious thing when you look at deficits. But the third aspect of trying to get your fisc in order is growth. If you can get sufficient growth without having to spend for it, if you can attract sufficient investment, sufficient jobs, and therefore sufficient tax revenues, that can also help. I think it'll have to be a mix of all three. Fortunately, the debt situation is not crisis. It's certainly something to pay attention to, but relative to some of the other states that Arvind and I talked to, it's a much healthier situation.
Isn't that unusual for a state this industrialized and this far ahead in terms of, I mean, both state GDP, per capita income,
to have this level of
this level of debt?
Yeah, yes. I mean, part of the point, of course, is that social spending in Tamil Nadu has also been higher than other places.
But if you're borrowing and spending,
no. So in that sense, this is investment, if you will, in people rather than investment in things. Okay. And hopefully it pays off in terms of having a higher quality workforce over time, a better educated workforce and so on. But the point has to be taken that we have to look at all these aspects and do what is necessary. Arvind has been, as you know, in charge of a workforce to look at the DISCOM debt. Yes. And the DISCOM revenues. That's not an unimportant part of the excess spending and how to target that. But I think if you look across in many states, so this is something that when this government came into power, looking at all the fees that have been stuck at very low levels, the property taxes that have been stuck at very low levels, how to get them to a reasonable level. You don't want to raise them excessively, but get them to a reasonable level where they match the kind of services that are being given in return for that.
From a revenue-raising point of view.
Revenue-raising part of it. And of course, on the spending, you have to be careful. Every state has to be careful that you don't overdo it on the social spending. So that's going to be very important. Of course, the DISCOM is part of it.
I think the reason, just to clarify to the audience, the reason I'm bringing up debt is because eventually if you want to invest in all the things you want to build out over the course of the next 20 years, you need money. To raise money, you need a balance sheet that you can raise money on. So that's why. Yeah.
So the question is, does Tamil Nadu have the macroeconomic stability base for all these things that it wants to do?
Sure.
So one, certainly the level of debt is not nowhere near crisis mode, but certainly has to be paid attention to. Now, it turns out that Tamil Nadu's Achilles heel on this is actually the power sector.
It is.
Because 1/3 of all debt is actually DISCOM debt.
Right.
So when we talk about macro, power is macro in Tamil Nadu. And therefore, the power sector is a challenge. And so, I, along with some colleagues, I wrote a report for the government on this. And I think the bad news, of course, is that the debt is very high. DISCOM losses are very high and have, still unsustainably high. But the good news, I think, is that the Tamil Nadu government is committed to actually getting this back on course, because let's not forget, along with raising property taxes, when this government came to power, it raised property taxes, but it also raised some of the tariffs and actually indexed them to inflation, which was a very kind of progressive policy. So the government has started to take action on that. It is committed to institutional reform, because the power sector problem is not just a tariff problem, it's also an institutional problem, because Tamil Nadu is one of the few states, in fact probably one of 3 states in India where generation and distribution are still in the same institutional setup, and every other state has done that, and also many other states have brought in the private sector into distribution as well. So these are some of the reforms that the government is contemplating, and I think there is a clear realization that unless these things are addressed, not only will the macro problem always be under stress, that also there's another dimension to this, which is that if you want to attract renewables into the state, the investment community will, if it looks at the DISCOM and sees that it's not a very solid balance sheet entity, their incentive to invest in the state will also come down. So for both those reasons, just attracting some of the big bets, because remember, we've not spoken about the big bet of renewables in Tamil Nadu.
Absolutely.
Especially offshore wind is, I think, a real game changer for Tamil Nadu. But in order to do that big bet, they realize that institutional reform is. So, so I'm going to be, keeping the Tamil Nadu
so you're
government.
the man in charge, and you're the man to
not
hold
in charge, but
accountable. At least to hold accountable.
Yeah,
What's
hoping,
the timeline for this?
I mean, that the government has to decide, but certainly I think it's very serious about, a time. See, because all these changes, you can't do it overnight, but they've certainly looked at these very seriously, and they're going to, have a time path for implementing some of these reforms. Because it's a matter of macroeconomic, survival. It's also a matter of attracting some of the big bets for Tamil Nadu.
Okay. In the vein of talking about revenue raising, I think two other areas that I want to focus on, and I'd like both your views on this. And one is, of course, the devolution of taxes from the center and how critical a role that plays in Tamil Nadu having the money it needs to invest in all the future talents. And secondly, most importantly, FDI. I think the goal to reach 1 trillion seems to be attracting, as the BCG presentation suggested, up to $4 trillion in foreign direct investment. Now, this is an area where Tamil Nadu has done well, but not as well as it scores on most other parameters. I think it ranks maybe 4th or 5th in terms of, the state share of overall FDI that India gets. So I'd like both your thoughts on revenue raising from the center, devolution of taxes, and the potential for scaling up FDI.
Well, I think from the center, the issue really is that over time, the center, we've both been at the center, more and more is being raised through cess, which is not shared with the states. Yes. And that is a problem. I think, Dr. Reddy's Finance Commission tried to make some statements about that and try to devolve more to the states. Since then, we've got a pushback, and we've got more towards the center slightly in the 15th Finance Commission. Now we have the 16th Finance Commission. More generally, I think India is too big to be run only from the center. The states are extremely important. We need to devolve more finances to the states. That's also where a lot of the investment is going to take place going forward, including in infrastructure. And so the steady devolution of funds and functions to the states that has happened over time, I think needs to be continued. On the FDI, almost surely we need to attract a much bigger part of the China Plus One. That's the strategic aspect, the China Plus One, the insurance that companies are taking against the a lot of those flows are going to Vietnam. A lot of those flows are going to Mexico because of
nearshoring.
Yeah,
Mexico nearshoring.
Mexico is nearshoring. Vietnam because it's more in the regional trade agreements and so on. That's something that certainly India as a country needs to focus more on. How do we get more of that kind of flow? And that would mean negotiating more of these regional trade agreements, which of course Tamil Nadu will benefit from if we get to be part of that. But I think even within the country, Tamil Nadu has to stand up and say, look, we're the place that you should be in and attract that kind of investment going forward. We heard a bunch of investment pledges made today.
Yes.
But I think there are so many, not just for exports, but FDI to sort of cater to the domestic market. I mean, think, for example, of green investment in green power generation within the state. If we have the kind of growth path that we aim for, certainly we'll need a lot more power. And that power can be generated through green sources. And it doesn't just have to be domestic firms investing. It can also be foreign firms investing for the domestic market. Lots of scope there. We have to create the kind of environment where that kind of sort of investment comes in. There are lots of entities looking to invest today because they're looking for new growth areas. So portraying that picture and offering, back to Arvind's earlier point, a sort of picture of stable policy, that will attract a lot of investment.
Yeah, so let me say something controversial on devolution. Okay.
Please do.
So just for the audience, every state gets some amount of revenue from taxes that are collected by the center. And we have this very august body called the Finance Commission that every 5 years says how much should each state get. Now, the fact of the matter is that in this devolution, and now I've studied this closely, and going to our forthcoming book is going to speak about that. This devolution has a big amount of redistribution in it, going from the richer southern states to the poorer Hindi heartland. Now, that was part of nation building, keeping India together. But over time, when other things go bad, southern states are increasingly saying, why should we, contribute to this redistribution consistently over time? And the big moment is going to be when the Delimitation Commission comes in 2026, when, if, for example, political representation is changed, which gives more relative power to the Hindi heartland relative to the southern states that have slower population growth, that disaffection will grow because the southern states will say, we contribute fiscal much more and we're losing political power. So the wedge between fiscal power and fiscal contribution and political power is going to rise over time. And I think, I don't want to paint too, dire a picture, but over time, I think we need a little bit of a recorrection in the fiscal arrangements so that the southern states, including Tamil Nadu, get to retain a slightly larger portion of resources that are coming from the center. So I think that has to be part of the new social contract going forward.
Okay. Hopefully the Finance Commission will look at it.
Hopefully.
Because this has been a debate that's gone on for quite some time now. But just to look at it from the revenue-raising point of view for the state, right?
So here, go ahead. Sorry.
Are there options, Dr. Subramanian?
Yeah, there are. So
if we don't get the ideal situation in terms of devolution, are there options the state ought to be exploring to be able to raise more revenue to invest in the things it needs to?
So in fact, as a matter of fact, the state is considered. So remember, states, the big revenue pools are the stamp duty, liquor policy,
right,
petroleum, and kind of property taxes as well.
The stuff that stayed out of GST.
That's out of the thing. And here, I think the government is actually, in fact, one of the things I'm advising the state government on is how to augment revenue in relation to stamp duties and property taxes, and also improving administration of the GST. Now, I think one has to be a bit realistic. My sense is that if this is improved sustainably, I think the state would get about 1 percentage point of GSDP, which is not small. If you take Tamil Nadu, for example, that would be something like, I think, 30,000 or 40,000 crores. And that's a huge amount.
Yeah.
And so those are the things which they're actively considering, which in the long run could help state finances.
One other source is devolution within the state. Okay. If you devolve more functions to the municipalities, there is a possibility that municipality could also raise financing themselves. One thing that India does very little of as a country is local body financing.
Sure.
And there, when you're raising money to fund a local utility or a local road, think, for example, if we go green in a much bigger way, you could have every local municipality having a 2 megawatt, 5 megawatt plant, for example, based on solar or wind, right? That could be financed by private entities financing the local body, because you can have a much better sense of what is coming in, what is going out.
Yeah.
So local body financing, more transparency about that, that's something that India as a whole needs to do. Tamil Nadu could be a forerunner in that kind of.
I think the major local body financing is the two ones. One is user fees, and the other is property taxes. Property taxes are done by urban local bodies, strictly speaking. And there, I think there's scope for increasing that even in Tamil Nadu by about half a percentage point or so. They could do that, and that would contribute to the overall thing. But I think I would be really careful. Raghu, this is one of the lessons I've learned studying Indian economic history is, I think we overdo this decentralization stuff.
We haven't done it yet.
No, because the closer the government is to the people, the more reluctant they are to tax. So this is a kind of political economy lesson I've learned from things. So that's why I get a bit nervous about too much decentralization, because you say if there's a man and he knows that the official there has raised his taxes, that generally contributes to a lot more to. So I think we have to be a bit careful and a bit imaginative here, but resist a little bit this thing that decentralization will give us all this nirvana of accountability, etc., because there's also more capture, more reluctance to tax.
These are arguments which have been made time and again, and we make it time and again without ever trying it.
Okay, but we will definitely put the audience to sleep if we talk about decentralization in more detail at this point in time. I do want to say, though, there is, I think, a municipal corporation in Madhya Pradesh that did do, in fact, a green bond for solar power. So it is happening. It's happening in bits and pieces. I want to come back to why you think Tamil Nadu, or what can Tamil Nadu do to attract that quantum of foreign direct investment. There are investors sitting here, there are investors attending these 2 days of conversations. What should Tamil Nadu be saying to them to get their money?
I think we've kind of touched upon this, quite extensively there and in this conversation as well. I think that if Tamil Nadu can, continue with its, stable politics, build on this, social stability and peace, have stable policies, and continue creating this climate. We saw, for example, it's climbing up the ease of doing business.
Sure.
But also I think for some of the big bets, like in renewables and things, some institutional strengthening will have to be done. For example, on the power side, for example, have to improve. So I think overall, I think Tamil Nadu seems to be on the trajectory, or creating the base for attracting this foreign direct investment. To some extent, a little bit more incentives here to attract some of the strategic investments it could do. But I think those are just small amounts. The broader thing has to be, continuing the governance, stability, trying to reduce, whatever investors are scared about. Policies, erratic policies, maybe corruption, all these things which investors care about. I think those are the dimensions along which it could do a little bit more. But generally, from what we saw today, Tamil Nadu does seem to be on the right track.
Let me make it a little bit more specific then to both of you. What can it do to rival Bangalore as a startup center? What can it do to build a thriving AI economy in the state? What can it do to bring the semiconductor Micron plant, which you don't like, from Gujarat to Tamil Nadu?
Not by giving a huge subsidy, not matching Gujarat's subsidy. No,
Sure.
I think
seriously.
I think you can't match Gujarat in any case.
But you get the spirit. You get the spirit of what I'm asking.
You asked about what would attract investors. Again and again, we have to come back to create, focus on the workforce that Tamil Nadu has. Because that's different. It's a capable workforce. It is something that will bring people here. And augment it with for example, the Nan Modalvan scheme to upskill the workforce, so that, again and again, when I was researching my book, when you talk to manufacturers in India more generally, they say, we can't find workers.
That's true.
How can you not find workers in India? We have so many people. Well, what they mean is we don't find workers who are adequately trained. That's where Tamil Nadu is different. And that's where we have to focus on building that strength, so that firms will come and invest in India. In Tamil Nadu, on the broader point that, what about the, intellectual property, the startups, the R&D, that environment we have the basics for that environment. We have to do far more. We,
What? Specifically what?
for example, we need more IITs situated in Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
We have IIT Chennai, we need more NITs, we need more medical institutions. We can't rest on the fact that we already have a lot of good institutions. We have to upgrade them because really the global frontiers is still something which we need to achieve. We need more industry academic collaborations. We've talked about it today,
Sure.
but we need far more of those. We need a much easier environment in the country. Now, how much is the state, how much is the center is an issue. Too many of our firms are incorporating in Singapore, for example, the startups, rather than incorporating in even Bangalore or Chennai. We need to bring them to incorporate in Chennai, and the way to do that is to examine what are the frictions that they have. Some of it has to do with India-level frictions of bringing in and taking out money. Those have been addressed over time. More will be addressed. But, an earlier friction was patenting. We've solved that friction by putting more resources to it. Now Tamil Nadu is one of the places where you have the most patenting in India. So I think we need to address each of these issues. What is inhibiting you? Why will you, and our entrepreneurs will tell us very quickly, why do I choose Singapore over India? Here's why, fix those. And where the state can do its job, we need to do that. And that's why I think I started by saying the ambitious goal is important because it focuses your mind on what needs to be done. And there are a few things that need to be done to make this an easier place to build those firms.
Sure. I do believe some Indian firms are in fact now relocating from Singapore to India.
That's a good thing.
A, because the tax arbitrage has narrowed considerably, and B, they want to list in India.
Exactly.
Far more vibrant market today than Singapore or anywhere else in the world is.
And what we have to do is make it easier.
That reverse flow is happening at a very slow pace, but happening.
Yeah.
So I think on manufacturing,
Semiconductors, AI, startups. How do we build that?
So on the manufacturing, I think we see by the evidence that Tamil Nadu is attracting more of it than other states, so it's doing something right. I think the problem is, the fact of the Global Capability Center in services, Tamil Nadu is punching below its weight. I think the BCG study that was done seemed to suggest that Tamil Nadu has a lot of talent, but actually the talent is migrating to other states in these high-end sectors. So they have a nice phrase for this called, the social infrastructure in Tamil Nadu is not as attractive as Mumbai, Pune, Hyderabad, NCR, and Bangalore. And so,
you mean we need more bars in Chennai?
that's one part of it. I think.
No, just say it now. Come on, please.
No, I think I'm going to stick my thing. I think there's no question that alcohol policy in Tamil Nadu is one of the weaknesses in Tamil Nadu here, and I think that
deserves a round of applause.
No, but it goes beyond alcohol policy. The social, the schooling, the rents, all of those things. So I think if you want to make Tamil Nadu an attractive services proposition, including AI, etc., I think one needs to give more thought to the social infrastructure
I think it needs more oomph, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I mean, it needs more oomph because actually Tamil Nadu is punching above its weight or maybe at its weight in many, many areas. It just doesn't seem to get that sexy, sales story going across the board, right?
I think, and there maybe to some extent, people think that, oh, it's a manufacturing state and not a services state, and that also takes away from the oomph of attracting talent into the, because remember, see, if you look at the unicorn data, for example, the startup data, which I've looked at over the last 5 years, Tamil Nadu is punched way below its weight in attracting unicorns relative to the other states.
Yeah.
And therefore, the broader thing of what do you do to make this remains on the table. And I think that,
This is going to be the key takeaway from our conversation to all the senior government officials sitting here. They were talking about oomph. It isn't going to work. Okay, so two last questions to both of you. One is, how do we put climate and sustainability at the center of all of this? Green energy is one way of doing it, but is the state thinking through, I keep asking this of the union budget. that when you write a budget as a country, are you writing a budget that is a sustainability-driven budget, and not ad hoc providing for small bits and pieces over time, right? So is the state looking at it from that point of view?
Look, remember that, so in Tamil Nadu, if focusing, there's something very peculiar about Tamil Nadu. There's the greater sustainability issue, which I'll come to in a second. But then Tamil Nadu in the last 5-10 years has shown that it's especially disaster prone. We had these 2015 budgets, and we had the floods this year. So I think the question of sustainability in Tamil Nadu has to focus a lot on how do you manage some of these disasters which are linked to climate change, for example.
So urban outcomes. Are you talking about urban outcomes, urban infrastructure outcomes?
So just the whole, how do you design resilient infrastructure is a big part of the sustainability equation for Tamil Nadu. And it's going to become a more and more important issue. And I think here, really, I think these floods, and of course the 2015 floods, I think are a wake-up call to the government to think much more seriously, because it's going to happen much more frequently, and therefore a big issue, and I think government will start devoting more attention to that. So that's on this very specific to Tamil Nadu. I think Odisha shares this kind of trait. It's not true anywhere. It's true, of course, all over the world.
I think increasingly in India, we're seeing aberrant weather all the time.
Over the world, right? But Tamil Nadu has two major. And then on the broader thing about the green part, there's the renewables component, which Tamil Nadu is thing. Yeah. The other thing I think, which is a very slightly controversial thing to say, is that remember that world over, there's a lot of focus on getting the subsidies that we give for carbon consumption, get it down. That's a big part. And Tamil Nadu is a culprit along with the other states, because if it actually subsidizes not just agriculture gets zero, pays zero charges for power, but even rich households are heavily subsidized. So any conception of a sustainable, green, renewable has to have energy pricing. So the resilient infrastructure, the energy pricing, and attracting renewables, these would be the three big components for Tamil Nadu for actually incorporating this in its development strategy.
Not just as a mention, in an annual report. My final question to you, Dr. Rajan, then, is on what has been for so long now such an enduring advantage for Tamil Nadu, which is its people, right? We've spoken about this every 5 minutes all through morning, trained, skilled people of great high value. But I think there's one number that concerns me. I believe that the median age of working people in the state is now at the higher end relative to other states. It continues to be an advantage, but at some point it may become a drag. What does Tamil Nadu do to turn this from a potential drag into a potential solution of sorts?
Right. Before I go there, just on the green, yes, every part of India is going to be increasingly exposed to climate problems, as is true of every South Asian country, as is true of many countries in the tropics. I think what you have to think about it all the time. One of the factors that contributes to resilience is diversification across areas, across industries, across sectors. And I think Tamil Nadu has an advantage there because it's not wholly dependent in one area. Even we saw 25% the distribution of activity within the state. But I think absolutely there has to be much more focus on how do we become much more resilient. Adaptation has to be the name of the game. And of course, we need to focus also on mitigation. But before we put all our eggs in the mitigation basket, we need to adapt to the possible changes that are coming fast down the line. On the issue of people, I think historically the answer to aging populations has been migration, which is be open to migrants, because you will find you can use them in very effective ways. And Tamil Nadu has been doing that for quite some time. So I would say I don't see aging as a problem if Tamil Nadu stays open and finds ways to absorb the migrants that come from the other parts of India, because India is still going to be young for the next 20, 25 years. What is important is that there has to be, again, maybe I sound like a broken record, you have to move to higher value added parts, because that's where your comparative advantage increasingly as a state is going to be, but you get the migrants to do some of the other areas that you are leaving. So India has to operate like a continental economy. The faster moving countries, in this case, the faster moving states, are going to go upstream in terms of activity and allow the slower moving states to fill in the gaps through migration. That will be part of the answer.
So on this question, see, historically, as populations age, there are two ways in which they address this. One, as Raghu rightly said, immigration, within India immigration. Now, remember this, within India immigration is both an opportunity, but also, you know, beyond a certain point, you get the same kinds of forces that you see when migration happens across borders. You know, in parts of India, we have seen a bit of a backlash against, you know, migration from other states. I think that's something that one needs to be aware of. I completely agree with Raghu. It has to be open, but not unaware of some of the long-term political consequences that can happen. The second way historically that countries deal with aging is by increasing female labor force participation. And you know, Tamil Nadu is doing well on that, but it's by no means, you know, it's still, so if female labor force participation is maybe 20, 30% now, another way you can combat aging is to get that up to 70, 80%, because then you get a larger workforce, even for the same amount of population. So immigration, greater labor force participation from women, I think is another way in which, and Tamil Nadu is well placed to do that.
And let me add a third, since Arvind and I are of a certain age. The third way is to employ the elderly. So keep using ex-economic advisors in new jobs.
I would wholeheartedly support that. But I think in one way all of us do it already is, you know, Raghu has not quite reached that age. I'm a grandfather as well. So providing a lot of babysitting facilities for our children is another way of gainfully employing the elderly like Raghu and me here.
Okay, I'm so glad I didn't get counted in that group. I just want to bring it back to Tamil Nadu, give both of you 30 seconds to wrap up in terms of a message. But before that, maybe take one or two questions from the audience. We have limited time, so if there's anyone who does want to put a question to our experts, please put your hand up and keep your question brief, please. There's a gentleman right up front who is really quick, so. Oh, sorry.
Training centers.
Just very quick.
You appoint the people, no problem.
Yeah.
But training is most important.
Training.
Training.
All right. Good.
Yeah. Well equipped and training. Then that will take the success.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's a comment, not a question. Question, please.
So I agree with the notion that, you know, going green is not necessarily, you know, something that many corporations will do on their own, which is why I think part of the answer for going green is regulation. The idea that it's win-win-win all the time, I think is sometimes oversold. And I think that's the point that Ashwath Damodaran is making. I do think we need sensible green policies to emerge from the government. It doesn't have to be onerous. It has to be incentive compatible, but that's something that needs to be thought through in every country, not just in India.
I think the backlash against ESG is also that it's become a way of kind of greenwashing and, you know, all of that stuff. So the you know, the manipulation by the corporate world of ESG, that's something that we need to prevent. You know, for example, a green project would have happened in any case, but then some firm says, oh, we did a green project, give us some extra credit for that. So that kind of manipulation of ESG, which has been happening quite a bit in the last few years, I think that we need to check as well.
So this is question from my side.
What is
I am Dr. Sai Babu. Hello, I'm here. I'm right in front of you.
Oh, there, so sorry.
Okay.
Because the gentleman there has a mic as well,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
a surprise his mouth was not moving, but there was a voice.
So I'm Dr. Sai Babu. I belong to a Madurai-based Tamil family. For the past 4 generations, my aunt sisters were working. If you get a job, then only you will get married. If you are starting a company, if you are running a company, they will never give a female or girl. Such a kind of conservative culture we have been gone through in the past 4 generations. But thanks to the latest policies of the government, very recently, I was also working for 15 years. And I finally decided I need to break the 4-generation culture. I need to come out from the conservatism. I started a small startup. Started with 2 people. Currently, we employ around 1,200 people into environmental sustainability direction. So this is how the Tamil Nadu families are emerging. Tamil Nadu is emerging. The days have gone. The startup is going to Singapore. The startup is going to the Bangalore. No, that's all myth. It's all fantasy. But slowly, the startups, the investments, everything will come towards Tamil Nadu. Everything will come towards the skill. Everything will come towards the engineering and English, what we have. We don't speak other than 2 languages, English and Tamil. But irrespective of that, we could be able to manage and we could be able to attract the investment all over the world. This is the specialty of Tamil Nadu. This is what the Tamil Nadu is growing. And I'm the testimony for that. Thank you for the wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Questions, please try and keep it to questions. You can get a chance to interact with our experts on the sidelines.
If you could address about the rising labor costs, how is it going to
Could you speak up a
impact?
little louder, sir? Can't hear you.
How is the rising labor costs? The economy is growing, the labor cost goes up.
Labor
How is it
costs.
going? Yes. How is it going to impact the growth? And number 2, how is this going to be affecting in terms of competition with the other countries? They're also looking to grow and to gain from the growing economy. I'm talking about other countries.
If I understood you correctly, sir, you're saying how will the impact of rising labor costs in India, play out in terms of being able to attract investments from across the world?
Yes, and also where the labor cost is
I
low,
think
other places.
This speaks to your low cost. Don't put all your eggs in the low cost labor basket,
Well,
right?
it's also the point that the first gentleman made about training. If we have a large unemployed population, but still labor costs are rising, it suggests that the ones who are unemployed don't have the skills to get the jobs that are available, which means that we need to train them up. That's why schemes like Nan Mudalvan start becoming important in bridging the gap.
So I think just
You want to offer a
2 points on
second?
that.
Yeah, okay.
One is that if labor costs are rising because of growth, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So you have to be careful what the source of the labor cost growth is. The second thing is that what has been, I think, so this is a bit of a puzzle that one needs to think about, is that Tamil Nadu is actually one of the richest states in India, right? Yet, why has it been able to attract so much manufacturing, despite the fact that you would think that labor costs are much higher than in other states? So that's a bit of a puzzle for me. I've not completely understood it, but it does seem to suggest that the other things in Tamil Nadu are good enough that they may compensate for the slightly higher labor costs relative to other states.
Does it also create a repository of skills?
Yeah, so that could be one
could
thing.
be one
It could be one thing. It could be higher labor costs reflects the fact that, if in effective terms, actually, labor costs are not as high when you correct for the real ability and the skill of the population.
That they're bringing in. Okay.
Okay,
Yes,
good
please.
afternoon.
Question.
I have a question, madam.
Where are you, sir?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I am actually from Krishnagiri district and migrated to Bangalore for my higher studies. But wherein I did my complete education in Tamil medium government schools and migrated, I have created job opportunities for more than 2,000 people in Krishnagiri district now. Don't you think it's a good advice? Why looking investment only from outsiders? If the government work with the district level achievers, encourage them, make them to invest into their own districts. Like we Tamilians are more sentimentally attached to the language and the districts places. Don't you think it's a good advice from the government to identify the local achievers and support them so that district improves, state improves, country improves?
So we were assuming that or
It's
rather
not
that is the basic
It's not
minimum.
happening. It's not happening.
It's not
See,
happening.
It's not happening. See,
Okay,
we are
so-
only looking for
so
the
do you want
achievers
suggestions?
from the
Do you want
outside.
suggestions from our panelists
Yeah,
on
please,
how that could
please
happen
suggest
potentially?
to government and please suggest
Oh,
also.
please suggest to the. So you want to use
government.
them as conveyors of
Actually, see, I have adopted 2 government schools. The best talents from the government school has come prior to 90s. After that, the talents are not coming from the government school because they're not getting the enough support and the scope. This is the area, if this improved, large talent pool can come, large development can happen.
Okay, great. I'm sure both of them heard you and will take the message to government. This gentleman has been standing here, yeah.
So, on a national perspective, do you think signing more bilateral investment treaties will sort of gain investor confidence across the country? Because recently, we paid a Japanese firm around a compensation of 1,500 crores. So, a strategic bilateral investment treaties will sort of gradually increase investment confidence. What are your suggestions with that?
Oh, which one of you wants to take
Yeah,
that?
okay, can I?
No,
make-
please
yeah.
do.
So it's a great question. You know that India allowed all its bilateral investment treaties to lapse about 4 or 5 years ago. And so that's been a source of concern, especially for European investors. So I think on balance, the government should consider these if it wants to attract investment. But I want to give an example and actually give a shout out to Vishnu, who's the head of guidance. Nadu, what is your investor climate? Was that actually the process of exit of this foreign investor, we made it very smooth and without any problems. So, in a sense, if you create a climate without the treaty is a good thing. But over and above that, if you create a climate that is not just good for coming in, but also allows smooth exit, because the smoother the exit, the greater the guarantee and assurance that you will come in. So that's a great example of things that states can do, because remember, investment treaties have to be negotiated by the center. They can't be negotiated by the states. So the center has to do these things, but over and above that, states can do these things by way of good exit that actually attracts more investment.
Yeah, which is a single window entry and then
All
an
of that, yeah,
easy
exactly.
single window exit as well.
But all
if
of
you
these are
want,
for
yeah.
entry, but I'm saying
Yeah,
that
that's what I'm saying. An easy single window exit as well.
As
if
well,
possible.
exactly, yeah.
Because it is difficult actually to
Yeah.
shut down.
Yeah, because labor problems,
land.
all of these, yeah.
yeah.
And I think the Ford example was a fantastic example of how smooth the exit was.
Okay, great.
I would also add that states need to play a bigger part in the negotiation of these investment treaties. Especially, it would be good if India were part of regional trade agreements, but invariably, we don't focus on what benefits us, only on what hurts us. So, for example, it's always agriculture we need to protect. But, Tamil Nadu has a fantastic presence in milk. Can we open up the milk products in other countries to our exports, value-added milk products, not just direct milk? So that would be an example of a state pushing the center when we negotiate with RCEP, for example, which I hope we will, that can we push some of our own agricultural products forward as opposed to just saying we got to defend and protect our agriculture against others.
All right. I know there are many more questions. Forgive me, we are out of time, but I'm sure you will get a chance. All right. Can you please keep it brief? What do you think in terms of thinking?
Building a third AI front from India.
Third AI?
Third AI front.
Yeah, that is what. Becoming a third front in this AI race. That is what I mean to ask you. Because there's a lot of race between Microsoft, Google, and big boys over there. And what about building a third front from here? And the second thing is that Mr. Rajan has rightly said, we need to add this higher value chain has to be handled here. and we just need a breakthrough. He said that we need a lot of IIT, NIT, and all these things, and just a breakthrough is required. Say, for example, computer works in zeros and ones. What if we can break it, work it with 4 inputs, 1 output, 1 input and 4 output? If that is going to happen, that can be happened. Like, I'm just waiting for my breakthrough in particle physics where an atomic spectrum is going to happen. Okay, just my question, I will make it simple now.
Yes, please.
What do you, okay, fine. I'll not go
I'm
deep
really
into the
sorry.
question.
Make it a 0-1 question.
I think
Make
you're
it a-
asking,
I'll ask in binary.
can Tamil
What
Nadu
is
and
your-
India
yeah,
play a
that's
big role in AI? Is that what you're asking?
Now, can India, as a
Yeah.
third front from here,
Yeah, get that. Okay, I get it.
That's it.
Tamil
I
Nadu
just
and
want
India
to
play
know
a
their
big...
opinion.
Okay, great. Can you offer an answer to that? And both of you, please wrap up in 20 seconds each if you have any other comments to make.
I wouldn't say third front. I would say India needs to have a presence in AI, absolutely, because it's going to affect every facet of what we do. It is going to improve productivity. For example, in software writing already, productivity improvements of 40%, 50%. So we absolutely need to have a presence. We need to not fall back in that race. Whether it's a third front or not, I'm not so sure, but it certainly is, we need to strengthen our presence in AI.
I'm sure there are many more questions. We're entirely out of time. Maybe have exceeded it as well. Thank you, everyone, for being a fabulous audience, and to both our panelists today for some very incredible insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the scintillating fireside chat. A lot of fire seems to have spilled over to the Q&A session as well. I formally extend my thanks to Uday Chandran, Principal Secretary of Finance, as well as our esteemed speakers. And let's close the session. Thanks. Okay, the next section on semiconductors will commence in 10 minutes. And it will feature Mr. Chris Miller.
special guest for our fireside chat, Professor Chris Miller, who's an expert on international politics, economics and technology, and the author of Chip War, for those of you who've read the book. So he's traveled halfway across the world just to be part of this session. So he's going to be joining us in a bit. Thank you so much once again for cooperating. For those of you just joining us, the session is all about once again, the audience who are probably waiting outside, we're all set to begin in a few minutes, so please take your seats. And those of you who are just joining in, we have the author of Chip War who's joining us for the fireside chat. Once again, I request you to please put your mobile phones on silent. உங்கள் தொலைபேசியை அமைதிப்படுத்தும்படி பணிவன்போடு கேட்டுக்கொள்கிறேன். My name is Sano and I'm really happy to be part of this session. I'm going to be hosting this session. Just about a few minutes, we will start the session. And for those of you who do not know Tamil, the logo that you see is T for Tamil Nadu. You see the arrow going upwards. That's our journey onwards and upwards. A land of endless opportunities. That is Tamil Nadu for you. So that's what you see in the logo. If you're wondering what that is, that's the Tamil letter T. And for those of you who are joining us here from different parts of the world, on behalf of the people of Tamil Nadu, I extend a warm, warm welcome to each and every one of you. உங்களை பேரன்போடு வரவேற்பதில் பெருமகிழ்ச்சி கொள்கிறோம். Thank you so much for joining us here and being part of the big celebration that is the Tamil Nadu Global Investors Meet 2024. Tamil Nadu is known for its hospitality, and I really hope you're enjoying your stay here. All right, so Tamil Nadu, as you know, is committed to creating a thriving ecosystem for the semiconductor sector with focused efforts to promote semiconductor design. This session, Semiconductors, the value chain imperative for building leadership, will focus on key drivers to trigger and foster large-scale opportunities within the semiconductor value chain. This apart, at the Tamil Nadu Global Investors Meet 2024, every session is also a celebration of knowledge. We have curated a terrific lineup of exceptional speakers who will deep dive and give us perspective on what it takes to be a global semiconductor hub. So we begin with a fireside chat, and our moderator for this session has more than 3 decades of experience in media, policy, regulatory, corporate issues, and political affairs. Mr. Rahul Sharma, Managing Director, APCO Worldwide, will moderate this session. And our guest for the fireside chat, as you know, is Professor Chris Miller, an expert in international politics, economics, and technology, and the author of Chip War, The Fight for the World's Most Critical Technology. The book, Chip War, won the Financial Times Best Business Book of the Year award and was described by the New York Times as a non-fiction thriller. Put your hands together as I invite this terrific team on stage. And thank you, Professor, for joining us. And definitely also want to ask you, since you're a teacher, professor, and all technology is powered by a chip, will a chip ever replace a teacher? Over to you, yeah. Can I request the team to provide mics? Getting mic'd as we speak. Audience will definitely get a chance to ask your questions, so all ears on the team on stage. You get a chance to interact with them.
Okay, hello.
All right. Thank you. Can we give them a nice big round of applause and kickstart the fireside chat? Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I hope some of you have had lunch. And if you have, you are suitably awake. It's one of those, scary part of doing post-lunch sessions is that you got to keep it extra interesting. And I can assure you that Chris is here with us, and it's wonderful to have you, Chris. And I don't know how many of you have read his book, Chip War. Came out at a really opportune time. And I got my copy soon after it came out, and I just loved reading it because the kind of insights and history that you read about and how well it got connected to what was happening in the world at that point in time when the book was launched was just an amazing experience. So it's great to have you here. We have about, I think, 25 minutes. So I want to keep time because I know the previous session went on for a bit longer, which has delayed a lot of other things. So I've been asked to keep time. And then I'll just have a few questions for Chris, and then we can open it up for a Q&A. I presume you will have questions, and Chris will have answers. All right? So welcome, Chris. I'll just very quickly start. So the other interesting part about Chris is that he actually teaches history, geopolitics, and he's also an expert on everything Russia. So before Chip War, he has written 3 other books, largely focused on Soviet Union. There's one book called Putinomics, which talks about the economics of Vladimir Putin, and 2 others which make for interesting reading. So if anybody's interested in what's happening with Russia and want to understand why is it happening, I think it will be a good idea to read his books on that. But let me quickly start with a few questions. And where did that go? Sorry. Let me just bring that out. Okay. As the world was quite shattered with COVID, right? Supply chain became a big issue, everything shut down. So what has changed since?
I think there are 3 big things that have changed in the world of semiconductors. One is that because of the supply chain issues that the entire world faced during the pandemic, manufacturing companies in the US and Europe, they all realized that today all manufacturing requires semiconductors. Whether it's cars or planes or medical devices or construction equipment, there are chips inside of those devices, and there's not just a handful. There's often dozens or hundreds of chips. And every year that passes, we put more and more semiconductors in our devices. And so the first thing that's happened is that manufacturers realize that whatever you're making, you require semiconductors, which means you need to understand where are your supply chains and how do they work. That's the first thing. The second thing is that AI has happened. AI has happened in a big way. And the advances in AI that we've seen, not just over the past year with the release of ChatGPT, but actually over the past decade, have been driven largely by advances in semiconductors. We've gotten better and better semiconductors that are more and more capable of cost-effectively training large AI systems. The trend has been in AI that the most advanced AI systems use twice as much data every 6 months, which means you need twice as much computing power to train the most advanced AI system every 6 months. And that's given rise to companies like NVIDIA, which not so long ago were known primarily for playing video games and now are used in AI training. That's the second thing. The third thing that's happened is the intensification of the geopolitical dynamics around semiconductors between China, the United States, and Taiwan. And Taiwan, of course, produces 90% of the most advanced chips. And every week that passes, there's more tension building in the China-Taiwan relationship and the China-US relationship, which has major impacts on semiconductor supply chains, especially the types of semiconductors that are used for AI.
So, focusing a bit on geopolitics, right? Because geopolitics obviously impacts supply chains, as we have seen. I mean, at this point in time, we are sitting where the ships are not really getting into the Red Sea because of what's happening with the Houthis, etc., etc. It's all geopolitics, but that's obviously impacting supply chains and will start impacting them more the longer it continues.
But talking about a bit on Taiwan, we are in a year when there are going to be lots and lots of elections, right? We have elections in Bangladesh today. The country is on fire. The next one, I think, is Taiwan. So what happens? I mean, in between Taiwan and China, the relationship at this point in time is a bit stressed. If it gets any worse, how do you see this whole semiconductor thing panning out?
Well, I think there are three big risks to the China-Taiwan-US relationship. They're China, Taiwan, and the United States.
Yeah.
Taiwan has elections this year, and it looks like still, but could impact the relationship with China. And then China itself has a much more opaque decision-making process. Though there are no elections for Xi Jinping, we know less and less as time passes about what's going on. And every time a defense minister is fired or a general disappears, uncertainty grows as to what's actually happening inside the halls of Zhongnanhai. And so I think in all three of those countries, there's a lot of risk to the relationship. And the problem is that today, nobody knows the exact state of the military balance. For most of the last 50 years, it was obvious that China couldn't succeed in taking Taiwan because the US had the military power to repel it. Today, nobody knows. If there was a war, who would win? The Pentagon runs war games, Research Institute runs war games, and half the time China wins, half the time the US wins. And that uncertainty is ultimately what's driving this concern that chip supply chains are centered on the island that is the epicenter of US-China competition.
So has there been some shift since the COVID meltdown of to other countries, and of course India is seriously looking at how it builds its own capabilities. So where do you see the trend? What do you think is happening at this point in time?
I think the first trend is that basically every major economy, India, United States, Europe, Japan, they're all putting more government money behind semiconductors because manufacturers in all of these countries during the pandemic were shocked in many cases to find out that actually they didn't have semiconductor supply chains that were as reliable and resilient as they needed. So there is a push for a bit more regionalization in semiconductor supply chains, but the industry is so complex, so expensive, so technologically sophisticated that you can't do a complete regionalization. It's just too hard, too expensive. There's not a single country in the world that can produce advanced chips on its own, nor will there be a single country that can produce advanced chips on its own anytime in the foreseeable future. So the regionalization that's happening has to happen in a way that's economically efficient and technologically plausible. And right now, I think you see governments and companies trying to find the right balance between responding to the demands for more resilient supply chains, but also doing so in a way that isn't too costly or too disruptive that you actually slow the rate of technological progress. And I think for a lot of governments that have focused on semiconductors really for the first time in a long time, they've had to learn a lot about how the industry is structured, learn a lot about these far-flung international supply chains, learn a lot about technology that until recently governments didn't have to know too much about. So there's been a lot of learning going on in basically all of the world's major governments about how exactly these supply chains actually work.
And who's working with whom?
Well, I think
more important, who's not working with whom?
But the big shift is that 5 years ago, China was beginning to play a bigger and bigger role in the international supply chain. Today, China is not playing a bigger role in the international supply chain. China is playing a bigger role in building up its own supply chain. And so you've got a bifurcation that is, I think, gaining steam, where China is building more capabilities domestically, trying to do so autonomously, and at the same time, other countries like the United States, like Japan, are trying to cut China off from cutting-edge technologies. And so I think what we're going to have developing is that bifurcation will continue. China's going to get better and better at doing more on its own, but it'll still be behind the international supply chain, which is going to benefit from the fact that it can draw on the expertise of Japan and of Korea and of Taiwan and of the US and of India, all of whom are actually happy to have a supply chain that's less reliant on China for a variety of different reasons.
So you were telling me something very interesting, that of late, whenever you've gone to Taiwan, you haven't been able to meet a lot of people because many of them are in India.
That's right.
How do you see that marriage happening?
Well, I think there's
what are people in Taiwan saying?
Well, in Taiwan, I think there's two factors that are changing the China-Taiwan relationship and therefore the China-India relationship, the Taiwan-India relationship. One is that Taiwanese firms are looking at the Chinese market and saying, our prospect for future growth here is limited. The Chinese want to replace us, any way the Chinese economy is slowing, they need to find new markets. And India, I think, is one of the biggest markets that they can approach. Second, Taiwanese firms are responding because other parts of the supply chain are saying, we want less reliance on China. And so if you listen to the big computer assemblers, for example, or the big smartphone assemblers that are non-Chinese, they're all asking their supply chains to develop more alternatives to Chinese suppliers. And India is a natural place to turn for design, for test and assembly, for device assembly, if you're trying to look to diversify from China. And so for the Taiwanese firms that actually do device assembly, that do a lot of the assembly and test of semiconductors, and that also do a lot of design, I think it's quite natural to turn to India as a source of that diversification.
And what are India's three core advantages and strengths that you see?
I think the advantages differ based on where you look in the supply chain. So if you start with chip design, for example, there are more people working in chip design in India than anywhere else in the world. So the labor force is just very, very deep, which is why there already are a lot of multinational firms with offices in India. And we heard just this morning the news from Qualcomm setting up a facility in Tamil Nadu. And I think that's not a surprise to hear that. And Taiwanese firms, Taiwanese chip design firms see the same thing. If you look at other parts of the supply chain, like the assembly and test of semiconductors, there are different assets that India has. The growth in the electronics ecosystem, for example, in this state, is going to contribute, I think, to more interest in assembly and test. Finally, if you look at certain types of semiconductors, you'll find that there's a desire in the auto industry, for example, and medical devices to have more confidence that your semiconductor supply chains are nearby. And so whether it's the Indian auto industry or the North American auto industry, I hear more and more companies that say, we want to have local suppliers. And I think for companies in India that are selling into Indian manufacturing supply chains, that's a real opportunity.
So you talked about China and its efforts to become self-sufficient in terms of its own supply chains, etc. So interestingly, and from technology point of view, because I mean, the general view is that China is way ahead in certain technologies. We're still doing a lot of catching up to do over there. And that, if I remember correctly, that Huawei came out with a phone which had a chip that sort of surprised the world and said, oh my God, right? And of late, Huawei came out with a laptop and everybody opened it and saw a Taiwan chip in it. So what is missing here?
Well, I think we swing between two different extremes on China. There are some people who think China is going to take over the world technologically, and others think China is never going to make any progress. And the reality is somewhere in between. There are very impressive companies in China. Huawei is a great example, a company that's really had tremendous technological progress over the last 2 decades, won tremendous market share as a result. But the reality is, if you dig into the semiconductor supply chain in China, you see a whole lot of imported expertise, software, machine tools, materials. And so it's true China is getting more self-sufficient, but it's getting more self-sufficient from a very low base. And most of the chips manufactured in China are still manufactured using imported tools, imported materials, imported chemicals. That doesn't mean we're not going to see more self-sufficiency. That's the policy goal. China is spending more money than the rest of the world combined each year to achieve self-sufficiency, and they're going to get some results from that. But that doesn't mean they're going to catch up to the cutting edge right away, just because the cutting edge is so hard to catch up to.
So in India, for a long, there's been a fascination with fab. Everybody sort of wants to get into that instead of starting slow. What kind of a journey India still needs to make?
Well, I think I would say a couple of things. First off is that political leaders around the world like fabrication. Fabs are big buildings. They cost hundreds of millions or tens of billions of dollars in many cases. And ribbon cutting ceremonies in front of fabs are great for politicians in the US, in Europe, in Japan, everywhere. And I think there's good reasons for countries to want to have a fabrication base, but there's also good reasons to be wary of over-indexing on fabrication. Because there's great value in supply chains in other parts of the value chain. In design, for example, there's more money made in chip design each year than there is in fabrication. Most people don't realize that. And so I think that in general, political leaders, when they think about the chip industry, they focus insufficiently on design and they focus too much on manufacturing. The second thing is that because fabrication is so expensive, you've got to ask yourself, do I have a comparative advantage in spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars? And some countries might have a comparative advantage there, but it's actually hard to have a comparative advantage in spending money. And so I think, in general, governments should be wary, should be skeptical of the idea that actually spending a lot of money on fabrication is the best strategy. It could be in certain circumstances for certain purposes, but your marginal dollar is probably best spent in other parts of the supply chain.
So you think India is well placed in the journey you're starting to make?
Well, I think I'd say a couple of things there. First, I'm very impressed by the scope of investment across the supply chain in India. I think the anecdote about me visiting Taiwan and everyone I know in Taiwan being in India tells you everything you need to know. That's where Taiwanese investments executives are spending time. That's where Taiwanese investments are being made. That's a good sign. I think second, the amount of focus on capitalizing on the number of Indians working worldwide in the chip industry and bringing that expertise together is also something that I find very impressive. And the fact that you have Indians working in Malaysia and in Singapore and in the US and in Europe is a talent pool that can be drawn on and is being drawn on. I think that's also very positive. And the third is the shift in electronics supply chains writ large. I mean, it's happening. Apple has basically said they want to make fewer iPhones in China and more iPhones in India, and they're not alone. All of the PC manufacturers are doing the same thing. Samsung already migrated all of its phone assembly out of China. And phone assembly is not semiconductor manufacturing. They're different, but they're correlated. And it's not a coincidence that Taiwan started with device assembly, then slowly moved up the value chain. And I think that's a path that other countries can take too.
So interestingly, during the inaugural, Tamil Nadu launched its semiconductor policy. Not sure if any of you have seen what the policy is about, because it was just going to be uploaded, but we were having a conversation with the CEO of Guidance just before we stepped into the room, and interestingly, he just gave very little information, but valuable information. Does that work in terms of subsidizing payrolls?
Well, I think for the design...
So what he said was that one of the key components was subsidizing the payrolls for semiconductor industry, and people are going to invest in here by about 30%. So we need to check that, but that's what he said.
And for chip design
for chip design
yes.
specifically,
yeah.
Specifically for chip design.
I think that's a plausible strategy. I think there's a lot of competition around the world as to who gets investments in chip design. There's a lot of places, not just around the world, but in India, where you can set up a chip design. And so governments, if they want to win market share, if they want to win new facilities, incentives are part of what you need. That's just the reality. You might like a free market, but the market is not free because every other government is subsidizing too. That's how the world works.
Okay. So I will ask my last question, and then I'd love to open it up for you guys. And the last question is, what kind of regulatory frameworks or guidelines do you think are necessary to govern the development and use of AI-powered semiconductor technology, ensuring responsible innovation and deployment?
Well, I think right now the answer is we don't know, because we barely have a sense of how AI will actually be deployed. Right now we have experiments with AI, but there really aren't AI products yet, except for ChatGPT, which is, it's more of a toy than it is a real product. And that's not to insult it, but we're in the very, very early stage of AI deployment. So I think governments right now are trying to understand, and companies are trying to understand, what would one want to regulate, and if so, how would you do it? Now, there's a couple of different ways you can regulate. One, you can regulate the people who are producing AI products. Two, you can regulate people who are providing the compute that AI training and inference requires. And I think both of those are routes that governments are going to look at taking. There's challenges in both of them. But in any new sphere like AI, it's going to take governments a long time to develop the expertise, to develop the understanding needed to begin the process, which is why I think that the regulation that will actually matter is the regulation that big tech companies roll out first, because that's actually going to impact how our products develop, how is AI deployed, and I think that's the regulation we should be following most closely for now.
Thank you, Chris. Questions, ladies and gentlemen? Please, gentleman in red shirt. Can we have a mic, please? Can somebody get a mic here? Or you can take this one. give this to you. Yeah, it works. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Madhusudan. I'm the founding CEO of Incor. We are India's only processor startup. We compete with ARM and other RISC-V companies. Now,
Just a bit louder.
Yeah, my name is Madhusudan. I'm the founding CEO of Incor, India's only RISC-V processor IP startup among the 6 or 8 in the world. Now, everybody talks about Indian design, but the problem is we've always been designing based on specs that have come from elsewhere on the planet. Product conceptualization is not an Indian strength. And there is an absolute lack of, say, VPs of marketing over here. So transitioning from designing to somebody else's spec to taking a leap of faith and saying, I'm going to take a gut feel on this product. That's why Apple succeeded, right? Not just because of the engineering process, and you can't do customer surveys. Ultimately, it's an act of faith. And we don't have brand companies selling products. How do we get to that? Transition from design to products is a huge chasm. I think everybody is underestimating that effort grossly.
I think you're absolutely right to identify that problem. I think if you look historically, what you find is that there is a pathway, and it's a pathway that has been followed by companies in Japan, in Korea, and in Taiwan. So if you ask yourself, what role did Korea play in electronic supply chains 50 years ago? It played a tiny, low-value role. What role does it play today? Well, Samsung is an extraordinarily important player in electronics, and it's a brand that's recognized globally. And so that's a path that develops over time. I think you shouldn't underestimate how long it takes, just because in the Korean case, in the Taiwanese case, and in the Japanese case, it took a decade or 2 decades to begin to develop those capabilities. So it's not going to happen overnight. But I think it's also not going to happen unless you have an ecosystem that exists. And that's what you have to build over time. And an ecosystem is not just one company. It's a pipeline of talent. It's people going between companies and learning different skill sets. And I think you're right to point out as well, it's not just engineering talent. Engineering talent is actually probably the easy part relative to the business acumen that you need to match technology to market.
Next question. That's off. You need to put it on.
Hi, Chris. Oh, here? Yeah, I'm Manjunath from Semtronics Microsystems, Bangalore. We are a power management IC company. I just wanted to know from you, what would be your suggestions to the government, whether to go into cutting-edge technology nodes, say in few nanometers, or into the legacy products, which are already being used in the country?
Well, I think I don't know that I'd have I think you'd want to do your market mapping first. So I'd let the government do the market mapping there. I think the key question is, if you're gonna, is how are you going to differentiate yourself from what's already on the market? That's the key question. That's true for any company. Yeah. And so when I talk to governments that are trying to break into a different part of the semiconductor value chain, the question I ask is, well, what's your differentiating factor? How are you going to compete? Are you going to compete on cost? Are you going to compete on product quality? Are you going to serve a market niche that isn't already there? And I think that's a question that I would start by asking. Is there a market in India that's not being fully served? Possibly so. I think what you wouldn't want to do is compete in something that's already being commoditized and produced globally without a strategy to do it better or lower cost or more effectively. And I do worry, this is not a comment about India per se, but about governments in general. When governments get involved in industries, they often don't have all the market knowledge you need. That's a real challenge. You've got to be very careful, I think, in making sure you develop the market knowledge so that you deploy your funds in the most effective manner.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris. I have 2 questions.
Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Kaja. I am one of the finance executives from Semiconductor. I've lived in Semiconductor for 20 years. So I'm just following your trend on Taiwan. I have 2 specific questions on Taiwan. One, we talk about this political tension. What is the root cause of it? I mean, let's just spill it out, because there is so much going on around the globe. We need to understand, based on your experience, what is the root cause of Taiwan's role in the whole semiconductor world? That's one. Second, it's more related to India and Taiwan. It's beautiful, like all the relationships, collaborations which are happening. Taiwan has certain sustainable competitive advantages. What are they? Compared to India, do we even have a shot at it in the longer run? Because all these political tensions that we talk about may go away temporarily. but what are going to be our sustainable advantages that we need to target to even to have a shot at competing with Taiwan?
Well, I would say, competing head-on with Taiwan is a dangerous game to play. And I wouldn't recommend it, but nor do I think that's what India is actually trying to do. As I understand the strategy of different Indian companies, of different parts of the Indian government, the goal is not to compete head-on with Taiwan or TSMC. And I think that's the right goal, is to not do that, but rather to collaborate. And to me, it seems there's a lot of interest in Taiwan in exactly that type of collaboration, whether it's in assembly and test, whether it's in device assembly, whether down the road it's in fabrication, whether it's in design. There's certainly interest in design collaboration as well. And so I think that's the right way to conceptualize the India-Taiwan semiconductor relationship. And I think the opening ceremony today had one example of that. There's a number of Taiwanese firms in this state who are investing not in a competitive relationship, but quite the contrary, in a collaborative one.
Hi, Chris. My name is Sridharan Mani. I'm from a company called Agisa Digital Innovations. We are a fabless semiconductor. We are designing semiconductor chips in Chennai. I've read your Chip Wars book, fantastic book. I really enjoyed reading it. But one thing I noticed is there was no mention about India in the entire book. It was coming somewhere at the end. Of course, we had some design works. So if you were to write Chip Wars 2 tomorrow, where do you see India in that?
I would have an entire chapter on Tamil Nadu. I think if you ask me the question, if I were to write Chip War in 20 years, or Chip War 2 in 20 years, would there be a bigger role for India? My guess is that the answer would be yes.
Thank you.
Time for 2 more questions. Anybody else? Yes, that hand, gentleman or lady, please. You need a mic. Can somebody get a mic to her, please? There's a mic to your left.
Hi, Chris. This is Shobha Rangrajan. I'm a tough Salem living in Chennai, Go Jumbos. So my question is, do you think that there will be enough talent, or how do you grow talent in India for developing fabs? Because we do design here, but we don't have that much talent for operating fabs in India, like China and Taiwan. What do you suggest we do?
So I think that the best way to develop fab talent is to have fabs. That's basically the dynamic. Right now in the US, where there are a fair number of fabs, but there's a major process of building a lot of new fabs subsidized by the government, there are incredible workforce shortages in a whole variety of different spheres. And if you talk to companies and say, well, why are there workforce shortages? Companies will say, well, we haven't had to hire anyone in this sphere for decades because you haven't built fabs in a very long time. And so I think if you want the workforce, you've got to actually invest in the companies that will hire the workforce. Now, if you ask yourself, what's the key challenge in fabrication? Workforce is part of the challenge, but there's also a lot of infrastructural challenges too. Not just roads and bridges, but also how do you source the chemicals? How do you source the materials? Do you have the power supply? Do you have the water supply? And all of that is also critically important as well. So yes, workforce matters, but I think workforce is something you can train. The infrastructure side is just as important.
Right, there was one hand going up there. No, there was one hand behind, just ahead of the lady. Yeah, that one. Sorry, that went up earlier.
I just need an opinion. There are several open source infrastructure has been developed for designing chips and everything else. But how will you think the fabs will accommodate those open source ecosystem? Whether the fabs will open up their processes for easier development of chips in futures?
Well, I think it's a totally different challenge talking about open source for design versus open source for fabrication. And fabrication companies have a very strong incentive not to be too open about their processes. I think there is, however, a fair amount of push to make it easier for smaller companies to get access to fabrication, at least for test runs and prototyping. And I think that's a place where actually governments and academic institutions have to play a role in making sure that foundry capacity is open enough for smaller firms, not only for the big firms, but for smaller firms that want to test a new chip or test a new product, see if it'll work, and then try to grow after that. But I think that's the most openness one can realistically hope for in the manufacturing process.
Well, thank you. I think we're running out of time. I'm getting one more question. I can? Okay, lovely. Gentlemen, your question, your turn.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
I'm Ranjit Dash from Realtek Semiconductors, Taiwan, and leading a delegation of semiconductor experts here. My question to Chris, assuming that I'm a representative of government, assume that I'm Prime Minister, and we see that a lot of Indian companies are quoting Taiwanese companies to come in and do the fab in India. Let's say that doesn't happen, and me being the head of the government want really badly this to happen. I employ you as a consultant. So tell me how this can be done with the, China, and I mean, India is in the crossroads that China was 20 years ago, with the hindsight of whatever had happened, whatever went, what was in their favor, what was against in their favor. Now we have our own play. So please advise what can be done and how it can be done.
Chris,
Thank
you
you
just got offered a job. So you must negotiate the salary before you respond.
I think the first thing I would tell the Prime Minister is success or failure is not determined by the number of fabs you have. Right? There are currently hardly any chips made in California. Most of the money in the chip industry goes to companies in California. And that is just fundamentally important to keep in mind. And so I think I would start with that basic fact, and then you can reason backwards about how would you like to make your money. But I think if you look at where does the economic value flow, it flows to companies that in many cases don't actually manufacture chips. And so I don't think we should over-index on the manufacturing as opposed to the rest of the value chain, all of which is also very important.
Which is what you said earlier. Right, so thank you. Thank you for your time and patience. And Chris is going to be speaking tomorrow again. He'll have a keynote speech, so most welcome to join. He's obviously going to talk something different than what we had a conversation about. We did agree on that one. So thank you once again. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for coming here. Thanks for being with us. Pleasure.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous. AI is a toy. Still in experimental stage. And audience, please remain seated. We have a riveting panel discussion that awaits you. But give them a nice big round of applause. What a superb session. Fabulous. And we'd like to say thank you to you with a memento. And for this, I invite Dr. S. Prabhakar IS, Tamil Nadu Road Sector Project, to present the memento to our fabulous moderator and speaker. Our memento is a representation of our ancient and traditional sport, Jallikattu. We may be in the age of super technology, but we do not forget our farmers. To the audience who's just about joining in, next up we have a panel discussion that awaits you. As always, the best of the best joining us. So I request you to please take your seats. Thank you so much, and one photograph, please. Professor, we keep hoping that you would visit our state and our country more often. You're welcome here. Thank you so much once again. Do enjoy your stay. We look forward. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the panel discussion, and I'm most delighted to invite the moderator for yet another amazing session, alumnus of Harvard Business School with over 2 decades of global experience building high-performance teams, introducing flagship products, scripting executable strategies, driving non-linear business growth, and leading organizational transformation. He's currently Managing Director at Micron India, Mr. Anand Ramamurthy. He will be moderating this session. And let me also tell you the speakers for this session. would be Mr. Ram Gopal Rao, Vice Chancellor, BITS Pilani, Mr. P. Rajamanikam, former CEO, Tessolve, Mr. Ravi Bhatkal, Managing Director, India, McDermott Alpha, Mr. Sudarshan Vasudevan, Senior Director, Engineering, Max Linear. And I also want to remind the audience that you can ask all your questions at the end of the panel. So for those of you who just joined in right about now, please take your seats, settle down, and let's have a great time together. And for those of you who've been enjoying the sessions, if you want to catch up on social media, if you want to leave your comments, you can use the hashtag.
You got your seat made there. Oops. What's that? They've got the nameplate for you.
We'll probably figure out how to.
Yeah.
Hashtag TNGym2024. That's the hashtag if you want to talk about us on social media, your feedback, things that you love, your questions, your thoughts on the session so far. We'd love to hear from you. Do check it out. And also, many of you would know that we had a grand announcement at the inaugural, a policy on semiconductors, and if you have any doubts, any questions, we have Smati from the guidance team who will answer your questions. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to just get the thing going.
Meanwhile, I take this opportunity to invite all those who are here for this very special panel discussion to quickly settle down so we can kickstart the proceedings. Our moderator for this session, Managing Director at Micron India, Mr. Anand Ramamurthy. And our speakers for the session, Mr. Ram Gopal Rao, Vice Chancellor, BITS Pilani, Mr. P. Rajamanikam, former CEO, Tessolve, Mr. Ravi Bhatkal, Managing Director, India, McDermott Alpha, Mr. Sudarshan Vasudevan, Senior Director, Engineering, Max Linear. That's our panel. Very quickly for the audience who's just about joining in. Can we give them a nice, big, rousing round of applause? And
you're one off. Yeah.
Audience, we can certainly do better. We at Tamil Nadu are known for our hospitality.
Look at some elements of, we look inwards and see what are the elements and challenges that face us as we start building a more robust semiconductor value chain in the country. And I think of semiconductor value chain, obviously, we're talking about design, we're talking about R&D, we're talking about research, materials, we're going to talk about manufacturing, front end, back end, and of course the whole distribution and value chain. So fairly broad-based topic. We'll try to cover as much as we can. Thankfully, we have a stellar panel that will cover specific elements of this value chain. So with that, I want to start off with Dr. Rao first, an academician of great pedigree. Dr. Rao, you and I have spoken about this many times in the past. India is the engineering hub for design, chip design, but there is this constant reminder about research being not deep enough, and how does the elements of policy, talent, curriculum, what can academia do, how can industries participate, no better than you to kind of talk to the broader elements of how do we make semiconductor engineering research more fashionable, more relevant, and ready for the big boost we expect to see in the next decade or so.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation and for putting me on this panel. Very happy to be here. I think if you talk about the semiconductor research in India, right? India is actually doing very well. Not many are aware of that. Recently, we did a survey. We looked at the top journals which are dedicated for semiconductor research. One of them is IEEE Transactions on Electron Devices. And if you look at the publications in electron devices area in that particular journal, India ranks third. China number 1, US number 2, India number 3. Not Japan, not Europe, not any other country. So that is a lot of good research is happening there. We also have presence in some of the major conferences and all that. And if you look at the sensors research, right, I believe that sensors is one area where India can really India needs to leapfrog. I mean, India needs lots of IoT kind of systems with embedded sensors, whether you talk about agriculture or security or healthcare, anything you take, sensors are going to be the future. The sensors market alone is like $1 trillion. That's what all predictions show now. The IoT market almost like $1 trillion by 2032. And India again does very well in the sensors research, right? India ranks second right now. If you again look at some of these journals dedicated to sensors research, India ranks second, only behind China. US comes third, right? So a lot of good research is happening right now. I mean, it's not that we are writing papers and nobody is reading them. Even if you look at the citations, India does very well in the top 10 countries. While there is so much of research happening in the semiconductors area, in the IoT area, in the sensors area, why is it that we still don't have a semiconductor fab or anything like that? I mean, these are historical policy and all of are the reasons. But if you talk about research, the ecosystem exists. Ministry of Electronics particularly has invested in 7 institutions in the country, with a funding of about 300 to 400 crores per institute. Almost like 1,500 crores of funding has gone into establishing what is known as Centers of Excellence for Nanoelectronics, started way back in 2006 at IIT Bombay, where I was the lead PI for that project, then IIT Delhi and many IITs, and now BITS Pilani is also covered in that. So I think among all of these research centers too, lot of good research is happening right now. But the problem with Indian research is, most of our research is focused on publishing papers. We think that a project is over once a paper is published. Now, we are not connected with the industry. As a result, not much of this research, finds its way into products and other things. And because of the lack of industry, academia collaborations in the country, particularly concerning the semiconductor research, though a lot of research happens, but industry, doesn't seem to be aware of what's happening much. And much of this research that we do in India is also with the parent companies in the US. I did a lot of projects for Intel, but most of those projects were Intel in the Portland group, funded by them and mentored by them, things like that. So we're not connected very well with the local semiconductor hubs because most of them are focused on VLSI design. In the VLSI design, India is doing very well. And I think a lot of research that way is happening. My only thing is more system-oriented research is what is required. Research that leads to building complete systems. Because if you are able to build those systems, then we can start companies and we can take things to the next level through the startup and other things, which is not as much as what I would have liked to. But if you just talk about understanding research, even fabricating devices, many people ask me, if semiconductor foundry comes in India, do we have sufficient manpower? I can tell you in TSMC in Taiwan, right, there are so many Indians right now working in advanced manufacturing. They are all willing to come back to India. In fact, they all play cricket there. They are the only ones who play cricket in Taiwan. And if the day there is a foundry in India, I can tell you a lot of them are willing to come back. And even in the US, right, Intel and any place you go, I mean, when there was a saying some time ago that IC is what? IC is Indians and Chinese. The Chinese may include Taiwanese also. But I think, if India starts a foundry, the manpower, the talent is least of our worries. and there are enough people working at the cutting edge of this research, I think India can pick up all of that. I think it's more to do with policies and other things, but least to worry about when it comes to talent and some of those kind of aspects.
Wonderful, thank you. And in fact, I'm reminded of what Chris just said, right? The best way to build fab skill is to build a fab. The way we built our engineering talent was to have a lot of the multinationals come and set up development centers. Obviously, it became a career for engineering graduates, and one thing led to another. And the other interesting takeaway, Dr. Rao, was the traditional compute store network paradigm. You got to pick the right part of the value chain to make sure that the research translates to more material outcomes, not just a research paper or a patent or a disclosure. Very important, but something more than that. So slightly changing gears, I'm looking at you, Ravi. We talked about the elements of value chain, an element that we don't often talk about enough, but superbly important in the whole supply chain is all the materials that comes into the manufacturing value chain. So among the very few companies in India, with the footprint in India doing this, so maybe talk a little about what you do and more importantly about how ready are we from a supply chain standpoint. I can say this with a little bit of pride. Micron is one of the first semiconductor major to set up a back-end fab in India, and it looks like we are working together. But just talk to that part of the value chain and what challenges and opportunities you see there.
Sure. Can you hear me back there? So I work with a company called McDermott Alpha Electronic Solutions. Our parent company is called Element Solutions. We're a US-based multinational public company. The history of the company goes back more than 300 years. In India, we were established as a manufacturing multinational 92 years ago. So we've been manufacturing in India for 92 years. We started with smelting. Of course, electronics didn't exist at that time. And then we've evolved and we've helped actually build the electronics industry in India. We operate in 50 countries. I guess the unique portion of what we end up doing is we go from chip to box, from back end of line semiconductor interconnects, all the way down to finished products, box build. And we have technologies and portfolios that cover that entire chain. So, we, as far as our infrastructure here is concerned, we've sort of evolved with the industry here, which is that we started with supporting final assembly, then we started with supporting printed circuit board assembly, then PC, printed circuit fab, and now we're starting to look at packaging with OSATs. So along the way, I mean, the technology we're a very technology-rich company globally, and the management philosophy is that if there is a business case we can actually do it, right? So there's no real barrier as long as the business case is there. I think as far as your second part of your question was, the infrastructure. So we have right now 2 manufacturing facilities in India, including in Chennai, and we have our global R&D center in Bangalore, which we established almost 18, 19 years ago here. There is a lot of work to be done in building up the materials manufacturing ecosystem and do it very systematically as you go along, and maybe leverage the capabilities that already exist here and co-opt those capabilities to sort of move to the next level. That definitely needs to be done, and it is actually being done. It's being mapped out, and as we speak, the most logical thing is we've got about, including you guys coming here with packaging, there's probably, I can count 8 or so, 7 other OSAT facilities that are in various stages. So starting with that, I think building the domestic capability for manufacturing the materials would be a good thing to start. And simultaneously looking at what the roadmap is to support a fab when it actually comes. And one needs to look at it in the global context that, we are a global company. We can bring technology from anywhere. And so I don't see that as a barrier, so to speak. I would say that what will drive the localization of production is the business justification. If there's money that can be made domestically with the capex and investments that need to be made, it'll happen.
Awesome, wonderful. Ravi, two things got my attention as you were saying, right? One was just a trigger on the concept of packaging, right? Many of us who've been in semiconductors, we have the challenges of physics and Moore's law and manifestation of that, making things difficult to make chips smaller and smaller. And a lot more innovation is happening in the packaging space, where we're trying to see how we can have more bandwidth come through innovative packaging, be that be what we call high bandwidth memory manufacturing in our world. And a lot of that is based on input elements on the substrate and packaging elements. So clearly a great sector to go after, because India seems to have gotten more wave of advanced packaging and OSAT-like manufacturing coming to the country initially, while the fab aspiration continues to stay, though Chris would recommend that we don't bother too much about fab. Thank you, Ravi. Appreciate your early comments. Raja, I'm looking at you as someone who's done successful semiconductor startups. You and I were having a fascinating discussion around, should India go all multinational in terms of footprint, or should we also have the ability and the intent to build more SMEs, MSME type infrastructure? So love to know your thoughts on this topic.
Okay. So I'll be speaking mostly on behalf of small companies and medium-sized companies. So if you look at historically, right, there are two models of how the semiconductor business has evolved, right? One is the multinational model. Right? Most companies are American or European. They have their corporate, like what Chris has said, right? It's in California. They do all the research and all that, and that's where, very wealthy companies, tens of billions of dollars. And then they have manufacturing all over the world where they find the cheapest possible, and design all over the world, again, as a cost arbitrage to find the cheaper design source, right? So that's one model. And countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, they have kind of adopted to being service providers to these guys, right? So that's one model. The other model to me is a Taiwan model, right? Taiwan is a indigenous self-growth, innovative companies that are Taiwanese, right? Or similar to the Korean story, right? If you look at Korea, right, it's Samsung or LG or SK Hynix and so on, right? And one thing that is very, very obvious, right? If you look at, none of these American or European companies have very big manufacturing in these countries. They use them, but they themselves do not have any, big footprint in manufacturing. I used to be a TI guy, right? TI had a manufacturing facility in Taiwan, which is now probably gone down to almost nothing from a manufacturing standpoint. They had fabs in Japan. There's no more, TI fabs in Japan anymore. Or they may have some very small. They did not expand. But they expanded in other places, right, where there was some cost arbitrage and so forth. So we have to decide as a country which path best suits us based on our talent, our strengths in this. So if you map that and say, like what Professor was saying, right, there's tons of research being done on MEMS or sensors. So can we build a world-class sensors company out of India? So you focus on certain niches and say, look, this is our strength. And take that and create indigenous companies out of it. And this is where the policies of the government and so on can come in and fit together and say, look, I'm going to invest $100 million on this very passionate guys who are going to build this sensor company. So I'm an ex-TI guy, and I'm a big fan of Maurice Chang, who built TSMC. They took a bet on him, right? He had all the the background. He was a fab guy. He had some business acumen. He had the connections. I mean, he was a very, very deep tech guy in, TI. So they bet on him, and guess what? 30, 40, 50 years later, right? Taiwan has become a powerhouse in this. So I think, we have to decide. Now, we are in 2024. Obviously, there could be a hybrid model where we support both the MNCs as well as, the local indigenous companies. My concern is, what I'm seeing so far is there's less of a support in this homegrown, support, right? That these guys really need. Because I guess there was somebody asked this question just now. They have designs, but they can't productize. So one of the things that can happen is, for example, the Tamil Nadu government can say, okay, I will guarantee you, you come to Tamil Nadu, you design in Tamil Nadu, I will guarantee you silicon validation. So as a government right now, they have a little bit more clout in this, right? They could go to TSMC or UMC and say, look, I'm willing to pay $20, $30 million, right? Take or pay. And say that, look, I have enough guys that, you do, give me shuttles, give me this, give me that, so they could be a conduit, right? Put together some guys. So those are the kind of subsidies that are really, really required. And then bang on some of these, bigger goals of, pick one, right? Could be sensors, could be MEMS, could be some, power semiconductor and so forth. So that's one area I believe, right, where I think we can excel and start this process. I believe 5 years, 10 years from now, we could be on a path to creating a TI in India or a MediaTek in India. But India has to have a plan. The other thing is, huge amount of subsidies are given to EMS companies, semiconductor companies, both from the central government, and each state is fighting with each other to give more. So it's never heard of, by the way. 70%, 80% of CapEx is funded by government. No other government in the world, I think, gives that. Not even in the US. But we give it. And guess what? Where all this money goes? It goes to all the equipment that is not made in India. So all these subsidies actually going abroad again, right? So again, right, you give the money, that's fine, because there's no choice, right? There's no equipment makers here. But you create a path that 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I need to have at least 30% of the equipment made here. It's not a bad ask, right? Because they are basically giving the money for you to free. So you come up with a plan, right? So I think, all these combinations of working together and every, whether it's Chris Miller or anyone else, right? We always talk about talent and is there a market? We have everything. We have talent, we have market. But I think finally is the politics. The politics of where these big companies would like to invest. So if we're chasing the big companies to come and invest, it's purely political in my mind. But if it is really, we want to grow and we want to become big contributors in the semiconductor globally, I think, and as the semiconductor market is going to double from 450 to 900 or a trillion, I think there will be new companies that need to come out of India, which will become sizable in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think the value proposition that I'm saying is, invest in the SMEs and MSMEs and, guys who have got potential.
No, agree. And I think Raja makes a very good point because I think India always does things its own way. So probably a hybrid is my guess to approach because when I look at the semiconductor engineering talent, we all owe a gratitude to TI that started its operation in the late 80s, early 90s because many of my own best engineers are essentially a downstream from that operation. And if you look at the dish tech, fintech, digital world, Flipkart, ex-Flipkarts are the ones who are running a lot of the startups in those spaces, right? So clearly you need some big pivot to help you train talent, get you to scale, and then the downstream provisioning has to be done so that we are not just MNC driven, but we have indigenous players come in and government has to have policy and incentives to back that. So wonderful. Another pivot now, Sudarshan. You've set up engineering R&D operations. You and I were chatting about how hard it is to find mixed signal analog guys, talk of TI. So tell us about, of course, we're all assuming that talent is easy, available. Tell us a little more about how true that is, what has been your journey, and what has worked and not worked.
So I'll make it a Chennai or Tamil Nadu context, you know, to make it a little more interesting. It's very different from Bangalore. In fact, I'll, you know, connecting some of the dots. It's finding talent and bringing companies is the easy part if there is the government backing to say this is what we want to do. I'll put that in perspective. Qualcomm's first R&D center in India was actually put up in Chennai, but it was closed down a year later, and 2 years after that they built it up in Hyderabad, and rest is history. So it is an indicator of, yes, there is talent visibility in Tamil Nadu everywhere. You know, Bangalore, half the talent pool in Bangalore is actually from Tamil Nadu alone. What are the things that make it a little different here? One, I think if colleges are listening, I'd say, or even parents, I'd say, you know, willingness to communicate is more important than the communication itself. Inculcate the idea of willingness to communicate. Language isn't a barrier. There is plenty of talent in Tamil Nadu. All the talent that transports itself into Bangalore are the ones that are able to communicate. The willingness to communicate is limited in many. That we need to improve. But the pure engineering talent, I've hired for large companies like Qualcomm and now with MaxLinear, and I've done for my own startup at Cubercom. Whether there is tier 1 colleges or tier 2, tier 3s, I've hired for my startup entirely from tier 2 to tier 3 colleges in southern Tamil Nadu. And I've had phenomenal success out of that if I was willing and able to coach them how to communicate, because almost entirely all of them failed my interviews that I would typically do for a Qualcomm. Almost entirely all of them. I took a chance and said, okay, I have to hire interns and train them. And then I find out, oh, it's actually, there is talent in there. They're just not willing to communicate. You know, I'll put a small example. When you say somebody, when you ask somebody in Bangalore and say, hey, you were supposed to deliver this task on this date, are you on track? And the guy will give you a story. And here in Chennai or in any part of Tamil Nadu, the guy will say yes or no. Then you will have to keep pulling answers out of them. And I have been able to hire in, and I actually had set up satellite offices in Trichy and in Coimbatore for a small startup in itself. And there is plenty of talent. I never had, you know, any difficulty finding talent if I was willing to figure out what their gaps are and coach them, and vast majority of it is in the enabling them to communicate. When that happens, the rest follows. Yes, there are niche areas where there is talent gaps. Analog mixed signal is one area where across the globe it's a challenge, and India is no different because it is harder. The harder things to do, there's going to be fewer people wanting to do, but that's where perhaps Chennaites, Tamilians can make a difference. We are used to doing things the hard way and doing the harder things. Let's go after it, do it. You know, build a talent pool here. Analog and digital, I mean, analog and mixed signal talent is going to be in need forever. It ain't going away anywhere. So, you know, invest in some things. Like Raja was saying, we have to figure out what we want to invest in. There are many avenues. If we are going to go chase after you know, MNCs, large MNCs to come set up stuff in Tamil Nadu, I think, you know, there's too much competition for it. And to be brutally honest, you know, Bangalore and Hyderabad have a leg up on many of those domains, right? But mid-tier companies and startups who, you know, need the talent, who can bring the talent, but when they go to Bangalore, that talent walks out the door within a few months. It's a revolving door for them. Create a niche for those types of companies, the mid-tier and the small startups. If you create an environment that is conducive to enable these mid-tier and small companies, Tamil Nadu will go a long way in the semiconductor segment, whether it is, you know, on the manufacturing side of things or anywhere up the value chain on the design aspects. We just have to decide what we want to do and go after doing it and enable the startups and mid-tiers to do it. Incentivizing large companies, every state in the country is doing and is going to do. We are no different. We are just going to have to be one of the many. We are better off. There's plenty more mid-tier companies and small companies. Let's enable them. That's what my pitch to anybody from the Tamil Nadu government or otherwise that are interested in listening to this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sushana. I think well said. I think all of us have stories of, in fact, I have a short story and I'll keep it really short. 3 years back, we are in the memory space. India doesn't have a natural talent pool for DRAM design, right? Like, we don't really have anyone that has done a DRAM end-to-end design from die, from architecture to silicon. And then, so we stuck our neck out and we hired a bunch of new college grads from multiple colleges in India, including tier 2 and tier 3, as you rightly said. Gave them the soft skills and cultural skills to go work in Japan because that was our primary operating partner. And lo and behold, and I'm so proud of this, 3 years down the line, we have, in the history of Micron that makes memory for a living, having a DRAM die come out with 0 reticle revision, first silicon pass, yielding to high volume manufacturing.
Industries on the panel. If running a fab of 30,000 wafers per month takes about 1,800 people, 1,850 people exactly. That's what, out of which operators are about 500 with ITI kind of background, 150,000 students doing masters in semiconductor areas. We have PhDs, 28,000 PhDs. So I think, when it comes to talent, a little bit of orientation is all what is required. But for me, semiconductor mission doesn't mean whatever is happening elsewhere, you do it in India. For me, semiconductor mission means innovating for India, exactly like what the automotive sector has done. I think meeting the Indian needs and developing further markets and further market penetration into the unaddressed kind of sectors, that currently is an issue. So that is what, to me, the semiconductor manufacturing is.
No, excellent insights. Raja, Ravi, any thoughts?
No, I think the focus on packaging as a natural bridge from between assembly and fab is a good one, because it is very possible to do that with less capex. It's not a stretch to execute. So the focus on packaging, I think, is really good, and probably we need to do more of that. The second thing which ISM is also doing is to also look at power semiconductor and look at compound semi, either gallium nitride, silicon carbide, but also silicon based, and sort of build that entire ecosystem, because there is so much need for that. Like Dr. Rao mentioned, I mean, looking at what the requirements are locally and building around that. I think sensors, I totally agree, but aside from that, power semi and building the entire power semi ecosystem and systems is going to be critical. So I would really do more of that as well. The third thing that I would say is a much greater focus on research. And I don't mean simply the multinational research. I'm talking about across the board. The percentage of revenue that needs to be put into R&D in this industry is huge. And we need to get companies, government, as well as universities in that mindset and frame of reference to, and it's beginning to happen. I mean, there is a consortium of 12 IITs and ISC and a lot of industry players coming together to build up the packaging research capability. But I think we need to do a lot more of that, I would say, across the board.
Great. One thing that I would say till the governments would be, hey, I've run a startup in Chennai, but whatever it is the policies are, how can we make it more visible, more obvious, more accessible, right? Whatever the incentives may be. How can somebody, not have to run through a lot of red tape before figuring out what it is that is available, how do you get access to it, right? Those things. I think enabling that, if the governments can do what they actually want to do, if they can make it easier for companies to leverage it, that is something that will differentiate Tamil Nadu from other places, is my opinion.
Just one comment there, Sudarshan. I think someone in the audience mentioned about the product market fit challenge that we have in startups, right? I think it's a genuine challenge because we just acquired an Indian startup, and what we realized was the venture capital community wants you to focus on larger markets for margin reasons, right? Because the Indian market is generally considered to be value conscious, not paying you the premium for the technology. I'm not saying I agree to it, but that's a perception. So you tend to focus on external markets. You don't have people with that knowledge. The people who generally come back to the country are largely engineering people who come back and other professionals, but not necessarily a VP of marketing, is what I think you mentioned or someone, right? And that's a gap. And then that is what is preventing some of the Indian startups from not getting the scale, semiconductor startups from getting the scale. And just the DLI is a good start, giving you incentives to go through the first 9-12 months of silicon tape out phase, but more importantly, getting the product market fit going. So very important. Although you would have some context there, right? So
yeah, of course,
a lot of context.
No, I think, see, it's a demand creation, right? If you look at the China model, right, Huawei exists because the end China telecom companies supported Huawei. And Huawei, so match that together and say, okay, we picked this 2-3 areas, right, for the next 5 years, and we indigenize along that and see what are the government policies that can enable that, right? Tata is putting a huge amount of solar near Trichy and so forth, right? There's a lot of electronics that goes behind it. It is a very classic case. They're tool makers for ages. Why can't we do India machines with the money or the skills for doing that? That's where the policies and the governments, right? They take a very nuanced approach, not just a general approach. Hey, you come here, I will give you 30%, 20%. Every state is saying that. But use our strengths in the state and guide policies, bet on some of these people. You vet them, right? You vet them. Are they serious? Do they know what they're talking about? Create a panel that you can vet them as well. But it's like what Chris was saying, it's a 10, 20, 30-year project. But we got to start. So I think that would be my recommendation.
Great, thank you, Raja. I think I'm getting enough signals that we have to probably stop it here. So if I had to do a quick summary, I think all of us have kind of spoken to on a largely... We'll take some questions? Oh, okay. So I'll still summarize and then we'll open up for questions, right? So I think the quick summary is we're all optimistic about the future of semiconductors in India. I think that's a safe thing to say, depending on which part of the equation we come from. The fact I can tell you is every state government is holding summits, and semiconductors is a natural part of that agenda. Tells you how keen and interested they are. We don't have all the answers, but hopefully between all of us, our intent, the policies, and the talent will help us get to the other side of the fence. So with that, we'll open up for a few questions. So I don't know. Anyone? Yeah, we see a gentleman in the back. A very enthusiastic gentleman. I think he's been cooking that question for a while. Want to come in the front a little bit? Maybe that helps. Yeah.
Value chain in semiconductors, is it more prudent to focus initially on ATMP so that you have high purity chemicals, gases, everything coming into the country before you actually go into fabs?
Right. Well, I'll give it a shot because Micron took a decision to set up the ATMP plant in India, and there's no right or wrong. Time will tell. The rationale behind that was it's a larger employment generator compared to front end. Back end provides you with much more of jobs, all levels of job, from floor technician to product engineering to senior engineering and R&D folks in areas like packaging and
interconnects, etc. So that was one rationale. The second one was, truth be told, India is still making steady progress, but we're not, the infra, the turnaround time on shipments, almost all of that is getting better and better. So any multinational will obviously want to ensure that the first step is more around capturing the essence of what India needs from an employment footprint ecosystem standpoint, and then see how it can be developed over it. So I think the government's intent is still to have a good mix of front end and back end, and we'll wait to see what kind of announcements are coming in the coming weeks and months and years. Any other panelists want to? Maybe.
I think we always take the path of the lowest resistance possible, right? So I think whether you call it OSAT or ATMP in case of a captive like Micron, I think the real bigger question is who's going to be the customer, right? For a captive, it's Micron, it's very clear, right, going to be. And is there a plan to develop the local packaging talent and local design dependent on foreign companies giving you business? Or are you going to use that as a base platform and build on that, right? So that's a question that any OSAT player who wants to come in needs to think through and roll it out that way.
But just start is essentially what I'd say. Just like they said for fab talent, you have to just start. Any of these, as long as you have an idea of your end customer, then just start. It doesn't matter. You will find talent, whether it is imported talent or local. Eventually, you will build it locally. Those are not the problems. Knowing your customers is the most important thing. Knowing your business proposition. Know that, start, automatically the rest will take care.
Okay, great, thank you. I see a hand over there.
This is
left side. Okay, I saw you, but I will go with you and then I'll come back to you. Yeah.
That's politics.
So
that will be a 2-hour session. No, just kidding.
so let me tell you, like, look, I'm an entrepreneur, right? So when I started the company, that same question came, right? Can you compete, right? But I was very stupid guy, very foolish guy. I just jump in. You want to be in this business, you got to take that plunge, right? Now, once you get into the business, that's where the funding comes. No company starts with a profitable business, right? You need a runway, whether it's a 3-year or 5-year runway to fund your losses. You have to have a plan. Once you get into the customer, now you're engaging with the customer, then the sticky process. In fact, most of the companies can't argue about this.
So we'll have an offline discussion. The only comment I'll make is, apart from cost arbitrage, there is a new geopolitical arbitrage, which is an interesting phenomena, right? No one will take a loss-making product, but the idea of being able to source technologies, people from different parts of the world has become even more prominent and important in the last couple of years. Right? So we have a clear direction that we can't take any more form.
3 months course for them, which they can take over the 4 years so that they can understand what it is and then can be a very good workforce, which will be a better model for Anna University.
That's a good point you raised. In fact, if you look at India, electronics programs, if you see, 90% of electronics programs have electronics and communication. Why communication? Why not semiconductors? So who said that every electronics must be associated with communications? I think that is the kind of a mindset change that we require. As part of the national committee, there is also a curriculum design now for semiconductor programs, a minor degree program offered to BTech students, right? That's the first thing that we should be doing. And from a minor degree program, then slowly move to the semiconductor kind of, electronics and semiconductor technologies kind of a thing.
We're all set for our next session. We're going to be meeting the movers and shakers from the world of business and entrepreneurship. So audience, I hope you're ready for this. catch up with the best of the best, the young leaders driving transformation in business. Tamil Nadu, as you know, is a land of endless opportunities. We have lots of youngsters, lots of college students also have joined us. Thank you for joining us. We hope this session will inspire you. I'm just curious to know how many of you here want to become entrepreneurs or start a business? Any show of hands? Look at that. All right. Just wishing you all the very best in advance. We hope to see you in the Forbes list very soon. There's a lot to take away from this session. And if you're wondering who the panel is, let me quickly tell you, we're going to have Mr. Rahul Maman Mapalai, Managing Director, MRF Limited. We're going to have Mr. Shankar Vanavarayar, Chairman, CII Tamil Nadu. And we will have Mr. Vijay Shankar, Chairman, the Sanmar Group. We have Ms. Anjali Singh, Executive Chairperson, Anand Group. And the session will be moderated by Dr. Lakshmi Benu, Director, TEFE, and Managing Director, Sundaram Clayton Limited. So that's how amazing the panel is going to be. For those of you wondering, Audience, our panel is here, and ladies and gentlemen, once again, warm welcome. At a moment when society's problems can seem insurmountable, it is inspiring to see young leaders bring new perspectives, share fresh ideas, technologies, and business models to the table and disrupt the status quo in the process. Our panel discussion today is about young leaders driving transformation in business, and our panelists for the session are a proof of what is possible and what leadership in its multitude of inspiring forms can look like today. So we're going to welcome our remarkable young leaders and a remarkable moderator, each playing a pivotal role in shaping the future of their respective industries. So carrying the legacy to greater heights, Mr. Rahul Maman Mapalai, Managing Director, MRF Limited. Accomplished business and organization leader, a spirited patron of arts, history, and heritage, Mr. Shankar Vanavaraya, Chairman, CII Tamil Nadu. Redefining business success with unique strategies, Mr. Vijay Sankar, Chairman, the Sanmar Group. Auto pioneer who's also passionate about wildlife and conservation, Ms. Anjali Singh, Executive Chairperson, Anand Group. And to preside over this engaging discussion, we're truly honored to have another trailblazer calling the shots in the auto industry, Dr. Lakshmi Benu, Director at FAA and Managing Director, Sundaram Clayton Limited. Join me in welcoming them with a nice big round of applause. Thank you, audience, and over to our moderator.
A warm good afternoon to all of you. It is wonderful to see you all and to be here as a part of this Global Investors Meet 2024. Thank you for the round of introductions. And without any further ado, let me kick off this panel discussion with a few thoughts around next generation entrepreneurs transforming businesses. Be it a new business, an MSME, a startup, a larger business, or a multi-generational one, entrepreneurship has been the cornerstone of growth of our Indian economy. India has a greater percentage of entrepreneurs and self-employed than any other large economy globally. Traditionally, multi-generational businesses have been known for stability and longevity. But today, the only certainty is constant change. And for younger leadership across all kinds and sizes of businesses, the key question is, how do we maintain a balance between stability and between the agility to transform and thrive? Being based in Tamil Nadu as we are, the state has played a very big role in all of our growth journeys. Tamil Nadu has been one of the industrial powerhouses behind India's growth story. As we heard earlier today as well, over 130 of the global Fortune 500 companies are located here in our state. Over 30 of the top 100 educational institutions in engineering, medicine, a lot of the technical institutes are here. We're number one in export preparedness. And with excellent connectivity, easy access to renewable energy, and ranking number one in the Good Governance Index, the state has really been a very strong place for all of us to call home. For us at TAFE and SCL both, the robust policy environment and the plentiful, skilled manpower in the state helped us historically to build our foundation in manufacturing. And today, as engineering and technology are at the forefront, along with the university ecosystem, we are also very fortunate to be here to use the state's advantages to build our strength in research and development along with the university ecosystem. As change is the order of the day, I'll just share a little bit and then go into the panel discussion. At TAFE and at SEL, sustainability has been a very big driver for change. So our traditional tractors, of course, continue to be very important, but recently we've launched an electric tractor with auto steer and farm management systems, future ready for what Indian farming will be. And very much in SEL, where we're in metallurgy and auto components, process innovation is, and some of the initiatives that you have undertaken in your transformation journeys. And the second, what are the strengths of Tamil Nadu that are playing a role in making your businesses future ready? Is there an opportunity to build some new strengths also on this space? So let's start with Anjali and come down this way then.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lakshmi, thank you very much for that very able introduction and for having us all here today. I think the transformation journey began some time ago, but it's still very much in progress. We're all really sitting, I think, at an inflection point where in our business, in the automotive business, in the Anand Group, where we have always been in all segments from railways to two-wheeler, we see the EV evolution and the electronics evolution. And I think that's what's so exciting today in India, that we sit at a point where we can really harness that power of part and the best in class to us in technology terms, and we provide the manufacturing footprint and know-how and local know-how here, and very, very proud to do so. This transformation point now is translated from overseas through our partners, but to become self-sufficient and to really take on the EV transformation. In that, I see a very large part of a buzzword, but it's a part of how we all do business. We as a family have always believed in the planet first, and now it is within our business systems, it's deep-rooted as a governance system. So we see the development of sustainability.
But not only have we thrived, we have grown over these years. A second big point of influx for us was, or a change for us was when we were faced with environmental regulatory impacts. I think again, we think we've been a pioneer. We're the first chemical company in the country to become zero liquid discharge. And in fact, the nice thing is in Tamil Nadu, we work very, very closely with the regulator on this particular aspect. So much so that now the term zero liquid discharge, which I think we had a small part to play in creation of the name, has now become an inherent part of the regulatory environment in Tamil Nadu. The second aspect would be, again, how we moved in terms of water usage. We are, again, the first chemical company in the country. All our new chemical plants are completely based on desalination water. We do not draw fresh water, given the water-starved nature of, or the competition for fresh water, drinking water with the population. So we've taken a policy decision, even though it's more expensive, that we will not use. I would say that we do not have a...
Good afternoon, and thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you for having us. Thanks for guidance to have all of us here. We were initially thinking this will be a post-lunch session and how this will go. But to the moderator, I must say, it looks like a good show started. But glad to be here. And two questions. One is to look at change, and the second is to look at Tamil Nadu. The first one, since there are others answering businesses, I also wear a hat to work and manage educational institutions. Maybe I'll take that from that angle. The second, I'll also answer from a CII perspective, CII Tamil Nadu perspective. Change, all the things we've been hearing from morning, the strength of Tamil Nadu seems to be, it's one of the critical strengths is human capital. We look at the number of graduates, we look at the enrollment ratio, phenomenal numbers. But I think with all the change constant, with just both the speakers, and I'm sure the others will add in, the government also, we work with industry. So I think that is been critical in being changed and being relevant. From a Tamil Nadu perspective sense, and I think Tamil Nadu has to also look at this game at three levels. We have a section or a geography of Tamil Nadu which has to be built further. Chennai ecosystem has to match anywhere else in the world. So the Global Investors Meet is a great example. So I think great times, as we've heard from many people, bullish, I think is the word to use, certainly to build on that. Thank you.
And very much agree about being at an inflection point there.
So thank you very much, Lakshmi, for inviting me for this panel. And in terms of imperatives for change, I think for us, in our industry, the imperative for change is driven by the auto industry. And what we are seeing in the auto industry is, I think, truly remarkable. In my lifetime, I've seen in school, we had an ambassador and a Fiat. That's it. And to see what's happening today is nothing short of a miracle. And this we see in every segment, whether it's farm, whether it's two-wheeler, whether it's trucks. every segment is evolving so fast. Every company is launching new vehicles. They all want unique value propositions. So what that means for us is we have to evolve very fast. We have very short product life cycles. Our customers are expecting extremely high incremental change in performance. Even the end user is far more aware of what he expects from a tire. And the room for failure is almost nil, right? Grandfather came here 120 years back when he studied at the Madras Christian College. And he bought a house for his first son in GHT Road, which he went. And like my father always says, for us, Tamil Nadu is our karma bhumi. And I believe a large factor for our success is because we started here, right? And if you ask me the three main factors in Tamil Nadu,
like some of you mentioned, property. In India, for innovations for property. In India, for innovations for India and for the world. And if we look at some global benchmarks, the United States spends about 3% of GDP on R&D. Countries that have really fast-tracked
of its GDP on put from the heavily CSR central lab focused spend is really effective or not, but that's the point for a different discussion. As far as our own focus on R&D goes, we've increasingly moved in our chemical business away from the commodity business into the specialty chemical business. We're riding on the group's strengths and the Sanma Group. So we're working increasingly with innovator companies, very early stage development of new products through their chain in agrochemical and pharmaceuticals to work with them through the life cycle of the product. The reason they come to us, obviously, they see cost, they see efficiency, but they equally see a partner who is reliable and is willing to invest for the long term and who will not set up a plant next door with a copyrighted product, non-copyrighted, cheaper copy next door. So that credibility and trust is what we're working on. We're working on a lot of application R&D. So we're working on R&D on processes, trying to put up processes cheaper for them right from the day the product is made at the lab. So that's one part of R&D. On the other part, on our commodity side, we've innovated a lot from the feedstock side. We're probably the first PVC company in the world which made PVC from a completely renewable source. As you know, PVC comes from caustic soda and ethylene. And while one is a carbon source, the caustic soda comes from green power increasingly for us. And the ethylene, we are the only PVC company in the world, probably, or the second one, which makes PVC from completely renewable ethanol. So we are innovating a lot around the feedstock. I think from an R&D, basic R&D perspective, I still think we've got a long ways to go to catch up with the West. But I think there are a lot of opportunities around innovation-led, India-specific R&D, which I think can hugely help us as we go forward in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rahul, you had mentioned your focus on being a very product-centric company that's leading best-in-class tires across the country. I know you continue to invest very consistently in your R&D and very customer-focused. So what are your thoughts on what we can do to take R&D to the next level?
So I think, like I said earlier, to lead in this country right now, we have to set benchmarks, and R&D is essential for that. And what often happens is we kind of mix up product development and R&D. And I believe there are, right? So I'll just tell you what we are doing. In terms of to create the environment where engineers are allowed to do that, what we've done is we've built a new center in Trichy, where we've actually built a mini factory only for R&D. So the engineers are allowed to build what they want there under no production pressure. The factory is only meant to build R&D tires.
Fantastic.
And in 6 months' time, we'll have our test track coming up right near that factory, right? So they can build tires, test tires, learn, validate, and move forward, right? And my view is unless you give engineers an environment where they can experiment and learn, you will not move forward. And in terms of what we can do as a state, if all of us start investing in infrastructure, then the ecosystem gains, right? So because if an automotive company, no can do is really invest in, and allow engineers to really excel at what they do, right?
Absolutely. You. It's fascinating that you set up a factory purely for R&D. I think from what I hear from you both, R&D is no longer a question, it's a given. And with Shankar here, I think collaboration with academia in this state plays a very big role also.
Can I just add something on that?
Please.
looking at the data after we spoke, only about 4 to 8% in the last report, people who finish a PhD even continue with research, I believe, in India. Even though we have a high number of PhDs coming out every year, the reason maybe mostly is career-oriented or part of the work in an educational institution. I think the big need is we have to work with the regulator, the government, and educational institutions to see how the whole PhD research aspect is going to become industry-oriented, applied, and joint. Today, it's disjoint. You work with a government agency for something, and industry is not necessarily part of it. I think there's a big opportunity, and the student also gets the access to awareness on what is happening. So I think new models of how industry and academia work together for research projects. Today, if an engineer tries to, from a factory of either of the factories, come and try to enroll, it's not the easiest process. For a full-time academic, it's far easier to do a PhD because then it takes 3-5 years. So I think this model has to change in India if it has to become more applied, and that's when the coordination will happen faster.
And do you see on that note, the new center in IIT Madras, for example, we've had a great experience. Both TAFE and SEL, we both have a footprint in the IIT Madras center. And how do you see those kind of initiatives? Do you see them growing? For us, it's yielded great results in our collaborations with other universities overseas as well. And we have patents now that are successfully in commercial production. It definitely gives you that edge when you build the bridge between academia and industry. Do you see it proliferating as a model?
I think it's at the brink of it, and IIT Madras stands as a testament, a beacon for that. But also the fact that the last 20 years we've missed a lot of talent going into IT service, and it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing people have got great jobs and careers, but the fact is hardcore manufacturing, the core subject domains have not necessarily been concentrated on. But I see that coming back.
We'll come back to you with that very soon also.
Absolutely.
And Rahul, to build on your earlier comment, what are your thoughts on process innovation? Now, both of us are in material conversion, while they're very different processes. There seems to be a lot of scope globally to innovate on the process. And one trend we're seeing cutting across is, of course, Industry 4.0. Recently, there was a BCG study that said that 90% of executives in the industry felt that I 4.0 is a must-be for a future-ready factory. But less than 20% of them have actually yet to recognize value on scale from it. So we're in early days yet, but there is a lot of headroom for opportunity there. And we see the need very much for creating agile factories with a complete flow of information so that we can have better responses, but also more innovation in the process. And in your experience, what has been some key challenges? What have been your learning curves? What have been some benefits that you've seen in this area?
The Industry 4.0 has been in the news for the last 10 years. And our journey started 8 years ago. And we've learned a lot of hard lessons in the last 8 years. And I'd like to talk about two aspects of 4.0. One is automation. So we invested a lot in automation 8 years ago. And my learnings after seeing all that is we have to look at our country's cost structure and strengths when deciding what to do. We cannot ape what's happening in the West. So when I look at automation, I see 3 or 4 use cases which I'm convinced about. The first one is if you have a space constraint, you can use automation to go vertical to have a larger capacity in a limited space. That makes your ROI is very clear there. Second is if you have an operation which is unsafe, use automation there. Third is when you have a critical to quality parameter which has very low process tolerances and has to be repeatable, automation makes sense. But from a pure manpower saving point of view, with our current wage structures, I haven't got any savings. And when I went in, I expected a lot of increase in throughput. But the robots are so sensitive. Just to keep them up is difficult. So the downtime is kind of eating away the so-called throughput, right? So I think we have to really be clear why we're doing it and don't try and ape the West. And in terms of data, I've been hearing a lot about how AI can transform manufacturing, but to be honest, I've not seen any use case work so far. But where I see data helping us is, one is traceability, that it's impossible to manually record everything in the plant, so with good traceability. Second is tracking inventory in the shop floor for better planning and for better planning, right? So I see two very, very useful use cases. And if you make your investments based on incremental gains, then you'll be happy. But if you think you're going to reduce your waste loss by 20% based on AI, I think you'll be disappointed. And that's where people are going wrong. And don't get me wrong, I believe AI is going to work. But in my view, we're working on very small projects. And the critical thing is to work on small projects, learn from that, and then expand. And don't bet the bank on these large transformational AI projects. So that's my key learning from the last 8 years.
Very interesting and practitioner's perspective there.
Thank you.
For us, what we're seeing is really the big gap between translating trial run to really benefits at scale, keeping in mind India cost, keeping in mind the lack of people to maintain the uptime of automation and all of that is there. But the big challenge that we're also seeing is the ability to process that information effectively. So one thing we've invested in recently at SCL is a private 5G network, because for especially being in a conversion space, the number of process parameters that you need to completely track, capture, integrate, and analyze is really quite phenomenal. So if you need to get real breakthrough value and enough data to have a meaningful analysis and innovation, first we need to be able to work with that data. So we're really hoping that this private 5G network will be one kind of breakthrough that will help us scale some of the benefits that we're seeing. And I think to your point on India, and I'd love to hear if any of you'd like to add something, I think in India we'll have to tailor-make I 4.0 for India. And Tamil Nadu really is the place to be for that. We have the manufacturing industry, we have the pool of graduates, we have a startup ecosystem that's growing up with the universities. And the state government is also setting up a center for advanced manufacturing, which in addition to research, is willing to support industry of all scales. So I think it'll be quite exciting to see some leadership coming out of this area. But when we talk about innovation, R&D, I 4.2, it all seems to boil down to skilling. We need people to maintain those robots. We need people to look at doing machine learning and pattern recognition. We need people for new horizon, R&D, particularly electric vehicles and the ecosystem coming up around it. It will be not just skilling, but also a degree of unlearning and reskilling. And for me, it's been encouraging to see the government address that with programs like Nan Mudalvan, which has been quite successful. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anjali and Shankar, Anjali, your group has been very well known for creating best-in-class HR practices. And Shankar, you're both in education and industry with CII, you see all the different sectors. So where can we partner in both your views, to see government, industry, academia collaboration to create a strategic talent pool? Vijay, you're fully in Tamil Nadu. So what do you think can be done to create a strategic talent pool targeted at focus sectors? So we build on the state's USP that the government's trying to create. So maybe Anjali, Vijay, and Shankar.
Yeah, thank you, Lakshmi. I think just to go back to, Tamil Nadu for 1 minute, maybe I didn't address that. We too work in 8 states of the country, and I can only re-endorse what everyone has said, that our experience in Tamil Nadu has just been by far exemplary in every way. I think from the way that the government enables and also incentivizes you to be here, and I think these kind of shows are also a testament to that. But certainly, we are about 35% of the group here, so we have large manufacturing here, and we plan to invest largely in the state going forward. We have big plans. I think the OEMs feel the same way, so it's really a testament to say that how the workforce, the government, and the industry is coming together to really invest in the state. Just on Industry 4.0 for a second, a lot of regulatory and compliance pushes there on traceability. And I think the point that you hit is really critical. That are we ready, and how ready are we, and how do we handle the data? But this is where I think a lot of discussion is required around what is there on the regulatory end with traceability, and what is it that the costs are of Industry 4.0, and how do we use the data effectively. So it would be, I think, wonderful to put maybe deeper seminars together on that and help each other on how to really battle that, that whole space going forward. On skill development and HR in particular, I think we really have in Tamil Nadu some of the best minds and the best brains, and a very large workforce that is able and ready. With the transformation that we're seeing in technology, I think what is required is real collaboration between academia and the state, but also between all of us at an industry level, to make sure that some of the programs have built-in periods of time of a year or two at companies, so that that on-site job experience becomes very valid. Because there's such transformation in the R&D and in true R&D, in true development, that just straight out of university is often not working right now, but we need a collaborative kind of commitment from both companies and academia to do some more integrated courses. I think that would be absolutely wonderful. As a group, we have many ladies, over 1,000 ladies who are doing diploma courses, and then many of those we try and integrate. So I think that's something that would also be wonderful if we could encourage specialized programs and then integrate them into the workforce within their programs itself.
We've seen the benefit of that. We've set up some very specialized courses where we're part of the curriculum setting. We're part of, the internship program of the course. And the graduates we get out of those, it's a world of a difference.
I'll leave Shankar, who's the expert, to talk on this further. But on skilling specifically, I think Tamil Nadu, has clearly got the best industrial climate in the country. There's no questions about it. And as I said, with an enabling bureaucracy, I think manufacturing sector is set to boom. As far as our own effort, group's efforts, as far as training goes, we have a program where we take 200 graduates every year and put them through a year of training across all our businesses, chemicals, engineering and stuff. So for a year, they're actually not contributing actively to the workplace, but more learning. So that's the effort we've done, but there's a long ways to go. There's so many more things we can do, and I'm sure working with private sector institutions like Shankar's, I'm sure there are huge opportunities for talent to grow. On the point on the government's role in skilling, I'm really not sure that they should really do too much. I think they've got other things to do, and as I said, set up a great regulatory framework, work on further improving regulation should be their domain. I mean, skilling, I think, really is industry's own agenda to focus on.
It's interesting that when we talk about skilling and the sort of human capital, we talk about the biggest strength for Tamil Nadu is that. But also the fact that where we are as an economy looks like that's going to be the next propelling factor or the challenge. The fact that we have the big numbers, Tamil Nadu is, I think, concentrated on inclusion, concentrate on numbers, concentrated on infrastructure and quality. But I think the era to change some of it, what is the outcome going to be? What is the assessment? How does industry come mainstream? So today, everybody talks about relationship with academia, where industry comes and advises, but I think it has to get a lot more into the core of planning and doing. Because the certification in the past was based on knowledge, and the system here is an ITI, a diploma, and then a degree. But I think there is now the need is going to be a mix of all. I don't think it's going to be knowledge versus skill versus doing versus knowing. I think we need young people who are aware, who are curious, who are continuous learners. So which means I think we also have to, in a Tamil Nadu context, have to sort of do the whole puzzle very differently. I think it's high time. Some samples are there, great examples, and I think all of you touched upon the fact how you started working training, and training has to start while learning. This can't be education plus. Because young people want to get into jobs faster. IT has had some experiences how they train people, but I think education now has to move into a next realm. And today with AI, with the internet, online learning, it's not that you have to learn only in college, right? So you can parallel learn. So I think the change for us has to move from numbers, quality, infra, and that to outcomes and what they can do and as continuous learners. And industry cannot be looked as this guest person who comes and advises, has to be this co-runner in education and not necessarily the periphery person.
And even the other way, I think today with the pace of change, if we need to be as agile as we do, we will need universities to partner for continuous learning also, because it is not only placing people in the company, but skills are changing so fast. You may want somebody to even unlearn and relearn something, and how do we deliver that kind of knowledge and skill will be quite different. And one thing that we experienced at TAFE is we partnered with a few different institutes. This generation isn't learning in the same way that the previous one was. So we're doing bite-sized learning, gamification, a lot of visual content, peer learning, and along with peer learning application. And I think we do need those partnerships to come. As much as industry goes into academia, you need academia to come into industry for that kind of agile, continuous learning to happen.
I think from a time when people were doing one job, one career, few jobs, now many careers is going to be the next era, right? So which means continuous learning, as you rightly said. And I think education is really realizing it, and government is also working along. But exciting times, but very different challenges, though.
Absolutely. And coming to our next theme on partnerships, that's something both Anjali and Vijay you had touched on in your opening comments. It is really picking up pace as we see around us, whether it's JVs, associations with startups, technical tie-ups to acquire technology instead of growing it all at home. We see that this is going to be quite critical in transforming the pace and profile of the growth that companies see. And geopolitically, China +1 is adding momentum to this trend. I think Tamil Nadu is particularly well placed in this context because we have been a critical manufacturing hub for global majors like Hyundai and Daimler already over time. And this trend, I think, will reinforce our position as a key destination in the global supply chain. But the nature of partnerships are changing. So Anjali, your group is very well known for growing through strong partnerships. And with more global companies wanting to come into India today, what do you think are some of the factors Indian companies can capitalize on? And what do you think the international partner might really be looking for when they come in?
So yes, Anand Group has grown through establishing and growing partnerships since the 60s. So this is very much the space that we know and we're comfortable in. I think trust and transparency have to be put out there as the #1 and key theme if you would like to grow or establish any partners. I think the #1 thing is being a company with a good governance and transparent structure of working. To go all the way and to the last mile, whether that is in your governance systems, but also in your quality and your delivery. The real opportunity today is on the technological transformation. It's providing, again, the inflection point where a lot of technology partners across the world, whether it's in Germany or in Netherlands or in Japan or Korea, are looking to come to India and are looking for good partners. There is a need for capital, so there's a need for partnership again. There's a need of growth on both sides. And hence, we're sitting at a beautiful point where I think there will be a lot of people looking for good Indian partnerships to grow. The main thing that I think a partner sitting anywhere in the globe looks for is, do you on the Indian side have roots? Do you have a good base? Can you bring the supply chain? Can you bring the customers, the local customers? We have a very exciting market today for anybody. So can you, as the Indian partner, open up the market for them? Can you also help with some of the local issues and how to navigate the complex Indian mosaic that we are, and bring really India to the table? Whereas you sitting here may be looking at the global partner for technology and purely technology alone. In some cases market and in some cases customers, but largely for technology. I think if the partnership is based on the true philosophy of partnership, where you're not looking to compete with each other, but to bring your true strengths together. In our case, it could be the market, and in their case, it could be technology, or rather, then you really have key points and you establish what it is that you wish to grow together and not compete with each other, then I think you can have a win-win situation. I think also partnerships today are evolving in many different ways. So, of course, the JV route is a very established one, but is also one that a lot of give and take is there on both sides. And it's a marriage of kinds, and hence compromise is important. But there is also, of course, the route of technical licenses and technical collaborations, which can be very successful. There is the startup ecosystem, which is bubbling. And I think all of us really need to make much more use of the startup ecosystem in a view of partnership and not just investment. But I think looking at true R&D, maybe we can learn to work with the startup community as well in form of partnership. And then, of course, with academia as well. I think that too possibly is an area that we could really develop further. And I think in Anand Group as well, we see both the startup ecosystem and academia as two areas that we would like to develop further as we go on the journey of becoming more self-sufficient in R&D as well. As we have some companies where we are partners, and in other companies we are wholly owned, and we'd like to also be totally self-sufficient on R&D. So there are 4 or 5 areas of partnership that we see all growing and that have huge area of scale-up.
Thank you, Anjali. And in some of the work we did in ACMAL last year in the Auto Component Association, we saw that there was this trend also towards domestic-to-domestic partnerships that could be coming up, co-creation of kinds with some of the startups. And Vijay, you have a lot of experience, of course, in maintaining long-term partnerships, and you had touched on trust being very important as well. How do you see the landscape of Indian partnerships evolving?
I would echo completely what Anjali said. Sanma Group, the Anand Group, has a very large number of equity partnerships that have lasted over a long period of time. And what we have seen is, I think, interestingly enough, the partner in the Indian side has stayed constant over these years, whereas the change at the partners end has been quite, there's a lot of flux in most partners, and they don't last, the same people don't last beyond a few years. But going back to what you and Anjali said, I think there's a lot of change in the nature of the partnerships. I think what they are looking for from the Indian partner is very different from what it was, say, 20, 30 years ago. And what you're looking for from them, as an Indian company, you're more confident, you're more capable. The talent you have is very different, you're more global. I think the aspirations of both partners are very different, but I think the cornerstone of a good partnership is still trust and transparency and reputation. I think those are the only 3 things that really matter over a long period of time.
And I think Tamil Nadu will see a lot of action in this space because you see a lot of large end product companies coming in. We saw some of that this morning as well. We see a lot of large tier 1s coming in who will also need a tier 2 supply chain. And I would imagine that this would surely give a lot of momentum to grow through partnerships. And that brings us to the last big theme that we had spoken about, which is growth with inclusivity, and especially with a focus on gender inclusivity. We as a country, we're banking on our demographic dividend to take us from number 5 to number 3. And half of that dividend is women. It will also be critical for us to increase our per capita growth as we grow to involve women in the workforce. And it's projected that India can add almost 770 billion to annual GDP if women's workforce participation increases by just 10 percentage points from a reasonably low base, actually. But I'm very proud to say that being in Tamil Nadu and a woman, that our state housing over 40% of the women in manufacturing is a fantastic statistic. And this, from all the themes we heard today, I think will more sharply strengthen our USP. Because in the knowledge economy, when it comes to the kind of R&D innovation, we see women doing very, very well in academia. And the state being known as a very safe and progressive social environment for women, I do believe that we will be able to attract more two working families as well to our state into these sectors, and it should strengthen our USP. Shankar, from the CIA perspective, what do you hear across different sectors? I know that CII is in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in launching the Center for Women's Leadership. And what are some innovative after a break?
Lakshmi, I think like what you touched upon, we're already on a great ground. At least in this geography, we're in a great ground. And that's thanks to industry like textile. Today we hear about footwear, electronics, a huge number of women. But I think what's also interesting is engineering. So last year we gave away awards to companies in Tamil Nadu who were engaging women. So very interesting to see hardcore engineering companies, and we spoke about it. It's not like the past, you know, it's not like 20 years ago when everything was assumed. And today it's not that women can't do strong hard work. So it's an amazing mix and a transformative time where technologies are changing, processes are changing, women are getting into core of many sectors. But I think more awareness is also important, and more structural changes. Maybe the workplace is sometimes tuned, not necessarily enough. So if you see, textile went through a huge change in the last 30 years on global practices where people insisted that there are things necessary. If you went to Tirupur in a sort of a mid-sized factory, you would see a creche because that is mandated and such of those things. So I think from a perspective of Tamil Nadu industry, what we are seeing and hearing, naturally the number is higher. But I think what you touched upon is very important. If we have to grow faster, if we have to grow bigger, I think inclusion from a gender perspective, in a whole geographical perspective also has to happen. Sometimes women to be going from a district to another, it's happening now, but if they have to get settled and if they have families, then the ecosystem also has to be local. But this again connects to a larger conversation of worker facilities, transport, and housing. That's also something that comes up. But we have to keep this momentum higher, more awareness, more practices that make it as enablers has to be there, and that's why organizations like us, we are also trying. But from an academia perspective, you know, as it is, as you rightly said, academia has a great mix, right? So there are teachers, we have, I think, depending on which segment department, we'll have 53% or sometimes 60%. Students maybe 60-40, again, depending. But what happens to them after the graduation is a big question as well. How do you make sure?
I read a statistic there that said the majority of the dropout, I think we all know that anecdotally. One is, of course, when they have their first child. But the second, which surprised me, is actually when their in-laws age. So to me, it felt like it needs to be a conversation between society, academia, of course, but also industry, society, and the government to say, can we incentivize the elder care industry? Can we today, I think, I was very encouraged to hear what Minister Raja had said in the morning that let's incentivize other sectors to play some of those roles. So I was very excited to hear that the Honorable Minister is thinking in that direction. We need the childcare industry to be incentivized for the private sector to really play. Perhaps the government could help with lower income sectors for childcare as well. But surely there needs to be an incentivization around childcare and elder care. So there is a enablement framework in addition to what is happening in industry.
And I think more studies, more practices, HR practices, more understanding, sensitivity to what, and you know, there is the business in Coimbatore which employs, which has actually given degrees to 23,000 women. So they come and work in a textile business, but they get a degree in the process. They do an online education. There are, I think, very intelligent ways to do this, but I think more awareness, more understanding, structural changes also. I don't mean fundamental changes in business, but I think structural changes in policies, incentives, as you rightly said, has to be done. But I think we are at the verge of it, and if we have to keep our pace of growth, our multiple metrics, this is very important and crucial.
Absolutely. And I think the more and more examples come out of our state, the more it will create a virtuous cycle. For us, we brought our first batch of a few hundred women in significant numbers into the foundry. And foundries were always considered, you know, the last kind of bastion in manufacturing to bring women into. And that has really turned that myth on its head, because we're finding that we're getting an internal demand for more women due to their productivity, quality, adherence to safety practices, and that is really the best testament to saying that women add value as an economic USP. I think our state is in a great place because we are very much seen, as we heard in the morning as well, as a safe and progressive environment for women. And with a bias towards a knowledge economy, I think, and as much in manufacturing, I don't think there's any reason why our state should not be seen as the place for women in India to come to work. And it really should strengthen our USPs across all our focus sectors. And with that, I think that was the last of our big transformational themes. It brings us to the end of today's very engaging panel discussion. And firstly, I would like to thank each of you for making the time today and for very openly sharing your thoughts and views with all of us here. It's exciting to see how each of you are approaching transformation in your businesses, in your sectors, and building on your strengths to meet the needs of a rapidly changing economy. Be it R&D innovation, process innovation, adapting to new skills, partnering, and leveraging the strengths of inclusivity. It is energizing to hear the future-ready approach that businesses in our state are taking. For all of us with a major presence in Tamil Nadu, the state gives us a very strong positioning in the global economic landscape, as we heard from all our panelists today. There is clarity and stability of policy. There are inherent strengths like the skill set, and with very clear-cut initiatives. Recently, the government has also included some very sharp sector-specific and global tie-ups amongst these initiatives. We are well on our way to creating a path for a future-ready economy in Tamil Nadu. As we conclude, I'd like to once again thank our esteemed panelists. I'd like to thank the Government of Tamil Nadu and Guidance Tamil Nadu for the opportunity, compliments to the organizing team on an absolutely energizing start to the Global Investors Meet 2024. Under the leadership of our Honorable Chief Minister and the Honorable Industries Minister, we all look forward to Tamil Nadu achieving its trillion-dollar dream and beyond. Thank you very much. Nandri Vanakkam.
Thank you so much. I'm curious to know, entrepreneurs, I hear that you work so hard, you don't get sleep. Is it 18 hours a day work or 24 hours or how? 48 hours in a day? All right. You know what? Enabling the progress of our state and country, the real stars are our entrepreneurs. Give it up, ladies and gentlemen, with a nice big round of applause. Thank you so much. And, you know, so many session takeaways, but the most important being, it is advantage Tamil Nadu all the way. So fabulous to hear that. And we'd like to say thank you to you with a memento. And for this, I request Mr. Prashant M. Vadnare, IAS, Special Secretary Finance Department, to felicitate our fabulous moderator and our speakers. Thank you for this invigorating session. Truly amazing. Thank you. Audience, you can show your response with a nice big round of applause. Ranked third among states in India in ease of doing business, Tamil Nadu has a slew of initiatives that make business in the state absolutely hassle-free, enticing environment for investors when it comes to setting up a business. Truly is an exciting time to be an entrepreneur in Tamil Nadu. And we'd like a group photo at the end of the felicitation with our mementos. We request you for a quick group photo. Audience, you've been truly amazing. Give yourselves a big round of applause. You were attentive. You really made this special. Thank you for joining us. Thank you once again to our moderator and our speakers. This is the last session for Hall A, but hold on. We're going to have something exciting for day 2 as well. So let me quickly tell you, when it comes to Tamil Nadu, we're always thinking about the future. So we're going to talk about climate change tomorrow, embracing climate action through circular economy, and also Tamil Nadu as an ideal investment destination, evolution of the Indian auto industry and where it's headed. We're going to have Mr. Anand Mahindra, Chairman Mahindra Group, is going to be there. We're going to have a fireside chat with Mr. Hormaz Sorabji, editor, Autocare India. All of that is going to happen tomorrow. So when you're here at this hall, we request you to be seated at 9:30 because the seats are filling up really, really fast. So if you're here tomorrow, request you to take your seats at 9:30. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope you had a great time at the Tamil Nadu Global Investors Meet 2024. Thank you for your participation, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you so very much. For those of you who